registers. It's gonna be fun.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I meant register.
Oh, register as a guest. I'm sorry. You're right. I see it. Sponsoring faculty. Here we go. Is it the David?
These are golf canceled Thursday morning, me?
Yeah.
It is probably gonna be.
I'm holding tight to everything.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not, tomorrow the sun could come out. You never know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure this out.
Traditions at A&M.
Since he's on his wild way through, he said, I'm coming to the station. How was your BRA meeting?
We'll call him this afternoon.
You know, I'm leaning that. Who was in that?
I guess, Elaine is in there getting a contract.
I still think.
Water availability tomorrow. Statewide. Yeah. She's senior assistant.
Trent was wait for Christmas.
And I'll tell you what, dude, you cleaned up.
Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Can I get that
State, would you wear that?
I gotta put your email in there.
I didn't know the Senate was gonna look this sexy.
Yeah, I know. That is, don't even start that. Already changed. Of course you're gonna start that now.
We're not recording.
David underscore.
This gentleman right here.
Your mics are on, you might turn them off, or turn them on if you want. This way. Yeah. You ready?
What do you know?
Good to see you, brother. A lot of good things said. I met with the Farm Bureau, met with Cy, Billy, and things, a couple of them. They love them some Blaine birds.
That's good.
Met with the BRA too, the president. They love neat stuff. Good people.
And the verification code is.
You ready?
Hey, I believe everything I hear. I'm pulling
We can say here.
I've been dying.
Yeah. I bet. Good.
Let's get this puppy started, huh?
it now.
Okay.
What's your name?
David.
David, thank you.
No, everybody did. How do you turn this off?
Good morning. Thank everybody for joining us here at Baylor. Clerk, could you call the roll?
Chairman Larson,
Here.
Vice Chair Phelan, Representative Cassell.
Here.
Representative Ashby.
Here.
Representative Workman.
Here.
Representative Lucio, Representative King, Representative Price, Representative Navarez, Representative Frank.
Here.
Representative Burns.
Cool. Quorum is present. We have Doc Anderson. I believe, Doc, this is your district. You wanted to welcome us, and then you were going to introduce Linda Livingstone, the president of Baylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it's my honor to introduce and welcome y'all, my colleagues, to the absolute heart of Texas, God's country here in Waco, and we appreciate Representative Burns being here. I understand he just let him out of jail to come for this meeting, so we appreciate him being here. Y'all enjoy your day here. And it's my pleasure to recognize and introduce President Dr. Linda Livingstone, doing an outstanding job as the president of Baylor University. Dr. Livingstone, welcome.
Thank you. I just want to say just a few words of welcome. I know you have a busy agenda today, but we're thrilled to have you in Waco and at Baylor University, and know that our home is your home anytime that we can provide support for you or facilities for you. And I do want to thank you for the work that you're doing to steward the resources, particularly water resources of this state. We know that that is a resource that is going to cause lots of challenges in the future all around the world and not just here. And so the work you do is really important. And at at Baylor, we take stewarding the environmental resources very seriously, and actually have some faculty doing really interesting research on water quality and helping ensure that we have water resources in the future. So it's appropriate to have you here on campus. We have rain just for the occasion today to enjoy water outside while we're talking about water inside. So know that we appreciate having you here. Let us know how we can help you to feel welcome and have the support that you need both today and in the future as you're continuing to do the good work that you do. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope your meeting goes really well today.
Thank you, Doc, and appreciate it, President Livingstone, for accommodating us. Today, we're going to discuss a number of interim charges dealing with water availability models, water markets in Texas, developing a statewide water campaign, expanding water education curriculum, and the state flood assessment by the Texas Water Development Board. We have members that have crossed the state to join us here on this beautiful campus. Dwayne Burns from the Cleburne has drove down. James Frank from Wichita Falls. We have Paul Workman from Austin, Trent Ashby from Lufkin, and I believe you represent all around this area, Kyle Cassell from College Station. So I really appreciate all of y'all coming and joining us. Let's jump into the first charge. If any of you want to testify, witness affirmation forms are over on the side of the room. Just fill them out and hand them to the clerk, and we'll make sure that you're called up. We're going to have invited testimony first and then public testimony after that. We're going to jump into interim charge 4, examine the status of water markets in Texas and the potential benefits and challenges of expanded water markets. We've got our first witness, Rodney Smith. Rodney, if you'd come up and give us your name and the organization you represent. I invited Rodney Smith. The Jackson Walker folks in Austin indicated that he was involved in some of the largest deals between farmers and the cities out in the western states, and he's going to allude to some of that and how the water markets developed the states that are west of us. So, Rodney?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to share my experiences today in markets in California and throughout the West.
Yeah, just state your name and your...
Oh, sure. My name's Rodney Smith, president of Straticon, Inc. It's strategic planning and economic consulting firm specializing in water resources. I've been an advisor for a long time to the Imperial Irrigation District for over 15 years as we developed the transfer with San Diego. And I've learned the many facets of successful water projects and transactions, economics, finance, science, engineering, law, politics, and psychology. And all those things have to be brought together. So what have I learned as a water warrior over all these years? I start with 5 specific lessons from my experience that may be worthwhile for Texas to consider. And then I'm going to conclude with what I see as the strategic implications for Texas. I'm summarizing my written testimony today, which goes into far more detail than I can in my time. And since we also publish the Journal of Water and I blog, I even give you citations, so you can get a snorkel and dive as deep as you want to go on these matters. Lesson number 1, recognize private property rights on water and keep to it. I'm from the state of California. I happen to be conservative, so get those ideas out of your mind about me personally. But in 1991, we had a severe drought. And in surface water, we have a priority system, like most Western states. And you had a lot of the cities who had junior priority were really concerned about the lack of water that year. And we had a lot of senior water right holders who, weren't suffering cutbacks. So then Governor Wilson had a choice. Lawyers and socialists said, why don't we reallocate water by fiat through emergency powers? Some of us dreamers and other people said, why don't we have transactions? After a heated debate in Sacramento, Governor Wilson went with establishing the Drought Water Bank, which became a mechanism for emergency acquisitions under voluntary buyer-seller relationships at negotiated prices. Within a few months, they acquired 800,000 acre-feet of water, and that reduced the economic losses of that drought by hundreds of millions of dollars. 1 year afterwards, the Department of Water Resources commissioned a group of us to do a retrospective on the bank. And we were engaged in extensive negotiations with all the stakeholders up and down the state of California. We have many recommendations and findings, but the one I want to call your attention to was talking to senior water right holders. The actual debate over whether or not you're going to follow a priority scheme actually reduced their participation in the bank. And California could have done a lot better if they had stuck to the priority system out of the box. And I know this may shock you, but that's where California is today. We believe in the priority system. That is what gives the impetus for people to come out and engage in transactions. Otherwise, people worry if they step out into the roadway, are they going to get run over? Second lesson, landmark transactions arise from solving real problems and require political entrepreneurs. Now, what do I mean by that, solving real problems? Often you see people coming and saying the legislature has to do something before, something can happen. In fact, in the 1980s, that's what happened in California. Assemblyman Richard Katz passed some very important legislation that was dealing with black letter water law issues that did, in theory, facilitate trades. The problem is no trades happened. It was very frustrating to Richard. Then what happened in the 90s on the Colorado River, there was a real problem to solve. California had been using 5.2 million acre-feet a year of Colorado River water, even though it had a long-term right to 4.4. The San Diego business community knocked on the door of Susan Golding, the mayor of San Diego, in 1994 and said, you know what? We just went through this drought. We got a 30% cutback. The biotech industry ain't staying. Solve the problem. What that did is by the business community stepping forward and gave a political context for the mayor and later that local water authority to become political entrepreneurs, solve the problem. They weren't going to get second guessed. The business community didn't tell them the details of how to solve it, what is a good deal. They just said, come back with the beef and convince us that you solved our problem. At the same time, my client, the Imperial Irrigation District, is the largest user of Colorado River in the entire Colorado River Basin. We were still in the 90s. We still weren't sure about the priority system, and there were some junior water right holders that had some lawyers telling them some nice legal theories how basically they could steal my client's water without having to pay for it. Well, I sat there one day in a closed session with 5 directors, and we sat there and said we have 140,000 residents in Imperial County. The robber barons have 16 million people. We need a partner. So we entered into an agreement with San Diego County Water Authority to create that strategic partner. Those board members and some of the landowners, not all, also became political entrepreneurs to support the development of the transaction. We needed to navigate, though, state and federal policy. The major political entrepreneur was then Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt. Bruce had been a governor of Arizona. He established the 1980 Groundwater Management Act that actually established property rights in groundwater in the state of Arizona and made them tradable. So he was a very natural person, and he set the policy guidance that Secretary of Interior would approve any transfer of conserved water provided that you had a baseline so you could measure reductions of use. So if you're going to say you're going to save 100,000 acre-feet of water, you have to prove you've done that. And the only way to do that is to start with a baseline and measure reductions from that baseline. We used that guidance, and that was the impetus for Imperial's unprecedented and unanticipated offer to quantify its senior right at 3.1 million acre-feet a year. With that action, by strategically moving forward, we're able to move the bar down the field. Now, being in California, of course, we had environmental issues. The biggest question was, what's the impact of water conservation on the Salton Sea? Not going to get into details. The bottom line is Governor Davis at the time said, you know what? It's a major priority of this state to figure that out. So he got initially former Assembly Speaker Robert Hertzberg and later Richard Katz, who was then in his staff, to make it their 24/7 obligation over 8 months to negotiate an outcome. We sat in the governor's conference room 5 days a week, 80 hours a week. We had about 80 people in the room. We had legislators from the Senate, the Assembly. We had people from the federal government. We had members from the Indian tribes. We had environmentalists, so on and so forth. But Governor Davis put us in a room and said, solve it. A lot of blooding happened, but within a few months, we got a deal done. So the second big takeaway is significant challenges involve statewide interests. Have people come with solutions to real problems to identify where they need help. If instead you're trying to find the silver bullet that's going to unleash initiative, that's not hard. But major change will not occur without political entrepreneurship. As an advisor to the to the private sector, looking at a lot of opportunities and investments, one of my first questions on any deal is, who's the political entrepreneur? If there's not a political entrepreneur for a project, it's going to be harder to do. Third lesson, market transactions range from project development to trading of rights. This may surprise you, but California has, in groundwater, always had deference to local interests. Our major form of regulation has been through adjudicated settlements of basins that had severe overdraft problems, and the local parties and water users negotiated the solution to that and defined pumping rights which are tradable within the basin. And there is an informal market of leasing and sales of these rights. I cite in my testimony more about how the pricing works in these basins. In 2014, the California legislature passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. There was large swaths of California that was under severe overdraft, had not been adjudicated. The legislature told local interests, form your local entities, solve the problem, or in a few years the state will come in, and no one likes Sacramento in their backyard. Now, many of us expect that these sustainable agencies are going to look much like the adjudicated basins, and so I think one of the things I would say for Texas is take a look at what's happening in adjudicated basins in California, and to what extent can they help you figure out how to have groundwater conservation districts as they face over time groundwater pumping approaching the sustainable yield of basins. The fourth lesson, transportation arrangements are absolutely critical. You got to move water around. It's unlikely, the buyer and seller are going to be neighbors. In California, we are blessed with the California Aqueduct, the Central Valley Project facilities, the Colorado River Aqueduct. We have a lot of existing infrastructure. The big political problem is, how do you gain access to that infrastructure and under what terms and conditions? Again, Richard Katz, who was, by the way, in the 1980s, a wild-eyed guy out of Pacoima in Southern California, that everyone thought was totally certifiably nuts. He also got through the Katz-Wheeling bill, which established the conditions under which you can gain access to unused capacity and payment of reasonable compensation. We had fights in California about what all this meant. Again, Governor Davis had to get David Kennedy, his director of water resources, involved to do some fact finding. He later drilled down on this, and oddly, we were absolutely pleased that his conclusions on the facts were close to what our position was, as opposed to Metropolitan. That yielded an exchange agreement that the legislature approved. Okay. Again, notice what we're doing. We had a real problem, a real deal. We came with our problems. We didn't ask you to, do it ahead of time. The last lesson I want to give before going to strategic implications from my perspective is science matters. Science matters. Any project or transaction is going to change the amount, location, or use of water resources on other water right owners or on ecosystems. Sorry to use that left-wing language from California, but ecosystems, okay? And what is really important is to invest into what is the actual facts on the ground. In California, they've invested in models of the Bay Delta system, the Salton Sea. The federal government on the Colorado River system has an extensive modeling of the Colorado River. All this science has provided a framework for negotiations and formulation of policies and agreements, because without that, you're sitting there just exchanging guesses. I'm going to poach on the next panel just for a minute, if you'd be. This experience suggests Texas has to consider developing a policy towards science. While I have many thoughts about science, I want to leave you with one thing. Don't leave this as a black box to the experts, okay? You have to create investments in science where the analysis is transparent. We need to, we have found in California that models must be tested regularly, they must be updated, they must be verified through ground truthing. So if someone's saying the impact of something is X, Y, or Z, check it out. Because guess what? I'm a PhD, although in economics, so I know something about research. And you know what? We don't know everything. We have some of our expectations could be accurate, others could be inaccurate. What is critical is you bring science into the process, that you basically have something where they're asked to give you some monitoring and mitigation strategies, and you track performance. Don't let science sort of trump everything and you can't understand it. So where does that leave, from my perspective, is that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and Surface Water, and of course your Texas Water Development Board for groundwater, have critical roles to play going forward, so invest in it, at least in a sound program. So what are the strategic implications for Texas? My takeaways from my experience and expertise are that political entrepreneurs are essential for the success in the water sector. Focus on real problems, not on theoretical problems. As I said before, invest in your science. From my perspective, based on where I've been in Texas the last few years, your most pressing problems are in the Permian and in Corpus Christi. Last February, I gave an address at the initial Permian Basin Water and Energy Conference at UT Permian Basin. And there, I was asked to bring in what concepts out of the water industry may be useful for dealing with the Permian. As you all know, the shale revolution is a major transformation of oil and gas in West Texas. It's water intensive. It needs to improve on the water management issues. The major issues involve the transition from trucking to pipelines, which raises its own issues, as well as how to integrate better the development of brackish groundwater. I know a few sessions, wasn't Mr. Larson, you had a bill on brackish groundwater and all that. That is probably something worth, revisiting, because based on discussions we had at that conference, general managers of the groundwater conservation districts out there are at least have an open mind when they talk publicly about this issue. So from that my wrap up is going to be the economic stakes of managing your water problems are only growing. They're not going to diminish. They're not going to go away. What's interesting is, to me, based on my experiences, is that change doesn't come incrementally. Change comes big, and it becomes big when old practices are not sustainable anymore. When I started my career at the RAND Corporation, I was brought in to develop, with other new hires, domestic policy studies. But being at RAND, they said, I want you to meet someone over, we called it behind the glass door, the guys that did the national security stuff. And there was this guy, nice man. In 1974, he foresaw the decline of the Soviet Empire. In 1974, how many people thought he was insane. Probably everyone, including yours truly. But he laid out a compelling analysis of where the dynamics of the Soviet economy was going. It was just a matter of a tipping point. So I think the same thing happened in California water, and ultimately the same thing will happen in Texas. All we need is leadership. Thank you for your attention. I stand ready to address any questions you may have, and feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up, even after today.
Thank you, Rodney. Anybody have any questions for him? I think you were involved in the largest contract with farmers from the Imperial Valley that moved water to San Diego, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
And it was 200,000 acre feet of water over a 50-year term.
Or 45, but that's okay.
45-year term.
Yeah,
And I think that's what we're seeing materialize right now. The San Antonio Water Systems developed a relationship with 3,400 farmers in central Texas, and there are other transport projects that are in the development
Right.
following that same template that you were looking at. So,
right. I think the big challenge in all those projects is going to be obviously the local and community issues. What's going to be the impact on the local community of the water you develop and conserve or move? And based on some experience I had in Texas a few years back, some of the potential buyers are afraid of that political issue. So I think that's where political entrepreneurship is critical. Again, going back to my statement earlier, we were able to develop a consensus in Imperial County, not universal, but enough of the board and the elected officials down there that was in the long-term interest of the valley. So that's political entrepreneurship.
Yeah, we appreciate that. That's a great term. And usually you see somebody take a lead on any issue, there's an entrepreneurial spirit because they're breaking away from what the norm is. So
Right.
appreciate that. So thank you very much for your testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Wow. Yes, wait, hold on. So we got a question.
One
Wayne
quick,
Burns.
Sure.
two quick questions. So on the drought water bank, is that the correct name?
Yeah.
Is that surface rights only, or is that ground, or can you deposit groundwater rights?
Well, actually, they did a couple things. It was they moved surface water, but it came from three sources. One is let's say someone had a surface right, so they, to 1,000 acre feet, we called it they would forbear and only use 500, let's say. So 500 would go in the bank. Other municipalities, other districts with senior water rights actually had stored water. So basically, some of the water that was acquired, they just released because it was stored previously. The third thing was that we had groundwater substitution transactions. So you may have had a farmer that historically used surface water rights, and he would not fallow his land. He would switch for that year to groundwater. So then that released the surface water. So it was all surface water, but we had three tools
Okay.
to create the availability of the surface water.
So in California, because I know you have overlaying users and appropriative users and prescriptive users,
Right.
but is the groundwater owned by the state, or is it just kind of out there?
It's owned by the landowner.
Okay.
I know this may shock you, but California it's a nutty state. Trust me, I know it's.
I'll give you
My
that.
95-year-old mother wants to move to Texas, so I know it's nutty.
Bring her.
But you'll be surprised. Now that doesn't mean you can't fly into Sacramento and you run into people that want to make it a state resource.
Right.
Some of the people who were supporting the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, I think that's their long-term objective. But they couldn't get that through the legislature. The legislature said, no, create the local entities to solve the problem. Now, they put a deadline. If a local area is under severe groundwater overdraft, they miss the statutory deadlines of establishing their local entity or, implementing a plan, then the state will come in. But it's sort of, the way I would interpret it is state preemption is a last resort.
Do those local entities, do they have to honor? Are they required to honor like a seniority system or a first right? So, like, do overlaying users have a first right beyond the appropriated users or like a prescriptive user, or is there,
Well-
are they required to honor that, or do they get to come up with their own?
All 30 adjudications in California to date can be summarized is all that gets into the fight over the slicing of the pie.
Yep.
But if you said the sustainable yields 100,000 acre feet, you look at the historical users, the prescriptive users, the overlying, and the judge would actually sign off on an agreement where they said, we've settled, this is how we're going to slice the pie.
Okay. All right. Thank
So
you.
it's like a legislative process.
Yeah.
But it's it's by the water users.
Okay. Thank you.
Very insightful, Rodney. Thank you very much for your
Well,
testimony.
thank you for your attention.
Chair recognizes Chloe Lebernick with the Texas Nature Conservancy. Chloe? Just state your name and the organization you represent, Chloe, if you would.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Chloe Liebrecht. I'm with the Nature Conservancy here in Texas, and today I am here testifying on interim charge number 4 on water markets. So thank you for having me here today. So this morning I thought I would just do a couple of things. One is to just kind of look at some of the challenges and the opportunities that we see here in Texas to be able to use water markets specifically for providing water for both people and for nature. Then look at some of the kind of what we at the Nature Conservancy do and think about water markets both in the Western United States and other places around the globe, and what those kind of strategies look like for us, and describe a little bit of that work, and then finally round it out with some Texas examples of some work that we're doing here right now in this area. And certainly appreciate it, Mr. Smith's testimony, and I think that there will be some corollaries with some of the lessons that he was telling you guys about. So I won't go into a ton of detail about the current situation because you well know it, about the challenges that we have with water scarcity here in Texas and across the United States. Certainly the trends that we are seeing in the Western United States in terms of demand outstripping supply over time, and that combined with, prolonged drought, as well as aging infrastructure and some challenges with unsustainable, assumptions about what our future water availability will be, exacerbate that water scarcity. We see, of course, those same trends here in Texas. The water plan tells us that there's a delta between, our rise in demand over time and the supply that will be declining. And certainly that water plan gives us a lot of different strategies, including conservation, to address some of those challenges. However, I think what we see is that a real opportunity there as 2070 comes and municipal use starts to outstrip agricultural use here in Texas, to be able to negotiate some of those transfers of water in an efficient way, as well as having an opportunity to provide water for the environment at the same time. So when we at the Nature Conservancy think about what water markets are, we are thinking about it in terms of water for the environment. We think about it as voluntary market-driven mechanisms that are aimed at stimulating the flexible transfer of water to use water more efficiently within a system, and ideally use less water. So using that opportunity to not just reallocate within a system, but to reduce consumptive use. And then importantly, for an organization like ours, being able to dedicate some of that surplus water to the environment at the same time. Across the U.S., and when we were doing this work, we were doing all kinds of strategies. Mr. Smith mentioned some of the strategies that California uses. We use short-term leases, fallowing agreements, acquisition of rights, so both permanent and leasing, water banking, similar to the mechanism that Mr. Smith referred to, and then just demand reduction strategies, as well as water management strategies to kind of rejigger what what the water, the system's water is, to be able to more efficiently use it. The key there, of course, in a market situation is that it's a water use agreement between a willing seller and a willing buyer. So being able to go beyond our regulatory framework to really find other solutions beyond that. The Nature Conservancy does work in the water market space globally and in North America and Texas, so I thought I would give just a couple of those examples. In Australia, several years ago in the Murray-Darling Basin, we helped launch a community water trust that owns a portfolio of water rights and then works with farmers to buy and sell those water allowances to both meet agricultural and environmental needs. And of course, in Australia, it has vastly different both regulatory and ecological enabling conditions that allowed that market to really develop. Those are not conditions that we see in the United States, although we've been able to take some of those lessons learned from Australia and think about how we can apply them to the Western United States and in Texas. In North America, I'm just going to highlight a couple of places that we work. One is the Colorado River Basin, the big Colorado River Basin, that we work with farmers to do lease and purchase agreements as well as demand reduction strategies. We work in California's Central Valley to, again, do lease and purchase agreements and water management strategies there. And then are just emerging some work in the Verde River in Arizona. And then when we think about Texas, what I think you've heard this from us before on water markets, is that we really do see a lot of enabling conditions in Texas to do this type of work that we already have, particularly when you're thinking about being able to secure water for nature. Certainly the establishment of the SB3 environmental flow standards, just the recognition of the need for environmental water and the normalization of that concept. The statutory authority that we have to transfer permits between willing sellers and willing buyers and being able to amend those permits to be able to use inflows as a beneficial use is something that's critical to this particular strategy and something that not all of our states have. So we really see Texas as a really ripe opportunity for us to try to use some of that flexibility and authority to go beyond, again, the regulatory system and be able to backstop some of our environmental needs through a market-driven system. So in Texas, we're doing a couple of projects. We've been working for several years with many partners. Partnerships was a theme in Mr. Smith's testimony as well, because none of this works without partners. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about that work. We are working specifically with surface water here in Texas. There are still, as you know, several challenges with accepting in certain places with groundwater markets. So one of the places we're working is our Colorado River here in Texas, so the Upper Colorado River Basin in Texas. And this is really a project that stemmed out of some of that work that we did in Australia to be able to really think about how you can set up, using some innovative financing systems, how you can set up a mechanism by which you could start to demonstrate and trade water allowances between the agricultural community and the environment. So the Upper Colorado River, I know it seems not apropos today because of all the rain that we're getting, but as you guys know, the Upper Colorado can sometimes go dry during really peak demand times. It's also a place that a relatively small amount of water can have a really huge environmental impact. And it's also a place that we see potential for agricultural efficiencies and working with partners to do that. So this particular project's goal is to reduce on-farm consumptive use of water, improve economic outcomes for farmers, and to dedicate water to the environment all at the same time. And the strategy really is working with partners to demonstrate on-farm improvements that will improve soil health and water losses, as well as then improve agricultural efficiencies, and again, then dedicate some of that water to the environment. This project is depending on some innovative and private financing mechanisms to get it off the ground. We're currently working to fundraise for that. And that financing mechanism really provides an opportunity to assume some of the risk of on-farm conversions from the farmer to be able to demonstrate the benefits that we're hoping to get out of it. The second project in Texas I just wanted to mention is also a partnership project. We've been working for several years now with several partners, the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, the Hart Research Institute, Ducks Unlimited, and the National Wildlife Federation, to work on water market transactions to benefit our bay and estuary systems, particularly those that were affected by the oil spill. We are actively working on possibilities in Galveston, Matagorda, and San Antonio Bays. And what that project's real goal is to provide freshwater inflows at times of need to be able to sustain the habitat and the fisheries in our bays and estuaries, and the economies that then, depend on those fisheries and habitat. This is a project that is a little bit more straightforward transactional, trying to lease or acquire surface water rights, although there are some components that there are potentially components that we would be flexibly working with landowners on substituting groundwater, similar to what Mr. Smith was saying. So those are some of the things that we're seeing. That's how it gets sticky for us in Texas. It is innovative, it's incubating work, it's emerging work, but we do see a lot of possibility about how we can use our regulatory systems that we have in place to move towards a more robust trading system. Of course, these are smaller projects that we are trying to demonstrate how they could work so that we could, in different ways, try to scale that up within a system. And I think if we're thinking about challenges as we're moving forward, as we continue to, as the community, continue to try to work in this space, one of the things that we will benefit from is being able to kind of normalize the value and price of water, which has been a challenge in a functioning market. I would also agree with Mr. Smith that investments in both groundwater and surface water science are important to being able to really, with confidence, be able to tell, is the water that you're buying going to be there when you need it? Certainly, we've been doing a lot of that science on our own as we've been developing these projects, so that we know as a nonprofit conservation organization that an investment we make in a water right, for example, is one that will be actually pay in conservation. Long-term funding for this kind of work, particularly when you're thinking about supporting environmental benefit, is something that we're going to continue to have to look for. We're using those innovative financing tools as we can develop them. We're looking to some government grants and also private philanthropy. And then lastly, I think continuing to find ways to incentivize on-farm efficiencies. I mean, just seeing the numbers that we do in the state water plan, and that we're expecting to get our future water supply, 28% of our future water supply from conservation, and more than half of that is from irrigation conservation. And there is an incredible amount of great new technology out there, being able to find ways to help the agricultural community to be able to convert some of that to new technologies, I think will really go a long way into accelerating some of these strategies. So thank you for having me today, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Anybody have any questions for Chloe? I know we were out in Del Rio and we saw the footprint of Nature Conservancy on the Devils going out and acquiring conservation easements and protecting the groundwater and the surface water interaction out there. I mean, that's it makes a big impact on the market, because you have other landowners that haven't sold conservation easements, and we see the value of the water goes up as you limit the supply that could go, so there's nuances of what you talked about. The cost of the Australian model, what was the cost of that? Do you have any idea? what they've aggregated over there.
I don't know that. I mean, when they re-adjudicate it to be able to really kind of kick off that market, I think it was the tune to 10 billion or so.
Yeah.
But that's my recollection.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, James?
Wouldn't talk too much. When you're talking about reserving the flows for the environment, obviously basin estuaries are very clear. You know, what other places are you looking at trying to reserve it for the environment? Where, I mean, could you give me some examples?
well, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that. I think the two projects that I mentioned, the one was coastal, very definitely, freshwater inflows to our basin estuary system. The other one in the upper Colorado would be riverine flows. So trying to preserve environmental water in that river flowing down, supporting habitat. And in that particular case, there are a number of species that are threatened and wanting to be able to provide that kind of sustainable water.
Okay. I just always go back and forth in my own head.
Yeah.
Because we don't have any freshwater lakes, or I guess we have one natural lake in Texas, not freshwater, I'm sorry, one natural lake. And so we've already changed all of that. If you create a constant flow, isn't that actually unnatural to what the static state in Texas was?
And we're trying to restore hydrological function and to the level that we would support the environmental targets in particular places. That doesn't necessarily mean we're trying to restore a constant flow. And that's where some of that science comes in, and being able to say when is the peak time and when would a release be beneficial to habitat. So not trying to just create a new function, but restore what function was there.
Thanks.
Chloe, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Chair recognizes Dr. Charles Porter. Charles, will you come up and just state your name and organization you represent? Appreciate it.
Make sure I don't go over my time. I'm Dr. Charles Porter. I'm teach at St. Edward's University and other places. A little background about me: I teach Texas water policy. I have had some good luck with a bunch of folks. We worked on House Bill 1221 a couple of years ago. That first time that we ever had a mandatory disclosure of what a groundwater conservation district was since 1949. I've written some books about water. I think water policy is important to understand history first, and also many different journal articles about water and financing groundwater conservation districts through the years. I also have just recently, and I think Shannon gave it to you, Ed McCarthy and I wrote an article for Texas Law School about the methods and challenges of water valuation in Texas, which if she didn't, I'll be happy to share it with you. I have a PhD in economics and business, but I'm not a graph drawing PhD. I'm a real estate business person. I understand the business aspects of it. And I also have been an expert witness in over 625 cases of real estate around the country for 30 years. Shannon asked me to talk about the value of water, what it brings to land, and how it affects the market. And I'm going to be pretty blunt with y'all, and I hope you don't mind that. But I'll start out kind of in the reverse order. Sure, water brings life. It brings value. It brings more than value to the individuals. If you understand our most cherished social value in Texas is public school education through the 12th grade, you've got to have water there to have the right tax base and right value. We've got this conflict now that's quiet and going on, but if I was a city council person in San Antonio, my duty is to find water for San Antonio. But if I take it from somebody in Castroville, what does that do to that farmer? What does that do to that tax base? And those things are hard to imagine. Effect on the markets of water, of course, it makes the property more marketable, which we'll talk about real numbers in a minute. How you use it on your land and how you sell it in a non-permit required situation is pretty easy to figure. The problem in Texas is that it takes a long time to get a permit to move water around. Part of the reason is there's no political will to move water. If you look at Wimberley, Texas, you look at what happened out in West Texas with Jeff Williams Land and others, it's impossible to move water around. It's kind of like when you get older, you start having these tests and things, and these water permits like a 3-year colonoscopy. It just never goes away. And it makes it impossible. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some market value things as an economist. Let's go on to value real quick. Again, let's talk about what I can give you some numbers on water transactions now, and I don't think there's a good marketplace in Texas yet, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The most recent oil and gas water transaction I've heard, I confirmed it, which is hard to confirm because people don't talk about what they sell their water for. There's no MLS system or anything, and I don't blame them. But in Burton, Texas, where there's a lot of development going on, oil and gas development, a good friend of mine sold his water out of his stock tank for $25 a barrel, 42-gallon barrel. Sold 300,000 gallons just recently. You're looking out in the Ozona area and Permian Basin, $2 to $10 a barrel or more. If you look at then what you can use water for example, the Bragg case, the famous Bragg case that took 20 years to resolve. Glenn Bragg and them, I think the court's pretty much said that groundwater's worth $5,500 an acre foot. Well, he had a pecan orchard there, so that use is there. That makes that valuable. If you look at the article Ed and I wrote, I analyzed corn. If you look at corn at $3.50 a bushel, assuming you own the land, assuming you own the equipment, it might be worth about $250 an acre foot for irrigation. If you've got $7 a bushel, it'd be worth 3,000 acre foot. So the point I'm making is all these things, it varies a lot with each individual place. SAWS publishes their leasing of water in the Edwards Aquifer Authority, and they lease it for about $130 an acre foot a year. Again, there's no MLS system. It's hard to find comps. I did just recently a study in just the San Antonio Board of Realtors MLS system, and I looked at about 30 properties that were either on surface water or away from surface water. And I can prove through closed sales and actual proof and solid comparables that, if you're on surface water, it more than doubles the value. I can also prove if you've got a senior priority permit that already had on surface water that has a right to irrigation and you've got your diversion point in place and you're pumping, it could be worth 4 times as much. But it varies vastly across the state. All those, you either have the permit in place or you don't need a permit. When you get into permit requiring, it's a whole different ballgame because you have to remember that water transactions, time is especially of the essence in a water transaction. I love my friends at TCEQ, and I think they need a lot of help. You're looking at surface water transaction, an uncontested water transaction, a simple one between a couple of us on the river. They say it takes 300 days. A contested water transaction, according to Jim Griffin's study at AMN's Bush School, which I was lucky enough to review, takes up to 900 days. So in that long time period, that's too long a period for a market to exist. It's extremely difficult to operate in that marketplace. It's kind of like Paul and I experienced in Austin. I've been lucky enough to be involved in some development deals, and we all know that in Austin, it's not based on a time period whether your earnest money goes at risk. It's based on an event. And that event now is in Austin, it's not zoning, it's site development plan permit, which takes 2 years. So the market is tremendously restricted in that regard. One of the things that I see in the groundwater world is out-of-district permits are just, even though y'all have encouraged it with some of the words that y'all have said in your interim charges, the political will is not there. Y'all know what happened in Wimberley, Texas. I mean, the people in Wimberley came out, 3,000 people in the parking lot screaming about a transfer of electrical purification of groundwater over to Buda. Well, time is of the essence. Buda went away. That thing's still hung up. I don't know how long the permit's going to take. And I guess the question we've got to ask ourselves as policymakers is, if the political will of the people is not to transfer water around, what are we going to do? Is it fair to continue to have maybe people like me, which I'm not going to do it, invest in a water project that I've got to get a permit that may be not available, or it may take so much money to get that permit, it's not worth trying. The ultimate thing is that the strategy of some folks about moving water is to delay the permit, and then the thing we don't think about at all, right-of-way acquisition. What's your water worth to you? It's not worth much to me unless I can use it on my farm down in Wilson County. But if I want to get big dollars for it, or more dollars, I've got to move it to the end user, right? I can't do that. There's no pipeline, there's no right-of-way, there's no grid. So the question is, should we move water around the state? Should we move water from the wet areas to the dry areas? You talk to my friends in the wet areas where I teach water rights in Corsicana and way up Texarkana, they don't want to drop their water moved anywhere even if they could get money for it, period. I think that's something that we've got to consider. The only market that I see that works well in Texas is the market in the lower Rio Grande, because that's a totally different ballgame. You know, it's been there for a while. You don't have the priorities, the municipal, you know, it's based on the level of the reservoirs. The municipal cities can buy water rights, and Glenn Jarvis told me recently they're selling for about $2,300 an acre foot. My understanding is that if the city wants to buy it, you've got to buy two irrigation permits to get that 1 acre foot of municipal work. That market works well, and that's pretty well greased. But one of the problems with the whole marketplace and trying to create a water market is, if you look at my article, which we talked a little bit about fair market value. I think the best fair market value definition from Dr. Brueggemann and Fisher from SMU and from Indiana. And that's a much more detailed definition than just willing buyer and seller not being under duress. It assumes that they're well-informed and well-advised buyers and sellers. But to become a well-informed and well-advised buyer and seller about water in Texas, it takes lots and lots of money. So the only people that can be involved in these water markets are institutional investors. A simple investor like me would find it very difficult to do, and I think it makes it hard. If you consider and think about it, I did some numbers on a possible $300 million investment that was supposed to run water from Val Verde County over to San Antonio. Assuming you could get the right of way, assuming you could get that done, that my numbers show, if based on what San Antonio's water rate is now, in order to get a payback on that investment in 7 years, 82% of all the water in that pipeline, 80% of all the water San Antonio used last year has got to come through that pipeline. It's not going to happen. And to get the right of way for 144 miles down Highway 90, I don't know if it'd take 10 years, might take 20, plus all the other permit process. So I think we've got some practical problems with our water markets. The other thing that they didn't teach me in my first degree at UT, they focused on return on investment, which was fine, degree in finance, wonderful. But when I learned later on, I'm mostly concerned with the return of my investment first. And returning of my investment, 7 years is too long. Now, talk about, you know, you've seen some discounted cash flow analysis, present value analysis and things, but y'all all know that once you get out that 10th or 15th year, that money's not worth much to you later on. And so I don't understand some of the strategies that are out there as far as some of the people that are just really trying hard to make these water deals work, because I'm afraid it's taking too much time. Let me offer you some solutions. I remember Representative Burns, you asked me in Burleson a couple of years ago of some solutions, and I wasn't ready for it properly, so I'll tell you. First of all, for the water transfer, surface water, to get past the 300 to 900 day wait, I think there ought to be a task force put together of attorneys that are active in the marketplace, members of the legislature, guys like Bob Brandis and other experts, maybe somebody like me, to sit down and try to figure out why it's taken so long for a contested permit. 900 days, I think, is too much to create a marketplace. Probably the TCEQ needs some more funding to set these systems up, and you need to maybe triage some things. Second of all, I think we've got to make a decision as public policy folks. If you talk to Shirley Shoemake on the Sulphur River, who's a good friend of mine, she doesn't want a drop of her water sent to West Texas. She could care less if Robert Lee, Texas goes away. But as Texas, look at it from the state point of view, if we want people to invest in our municipal bonds here, we do pretty good planning, but we can't abandon whole parts of our state. And I don't want us to be county versus county Texans either, because it's something I think is really important. I think we've got to spend a lot of dollars on science. I think we've got to convince the people in Wimberley that we're not going to transfer all their waterway where they can't get a drink of water. In the same token, my friends that own ranches in an area who own that water, you know, what's wrong with them selling some of their water to somebody else that might need it? And those are, and why should they be treated like they're the Frankenstein monster? Because they've done that. You know, some of them have basically told me, I hadn't even covered my legal fees for signing the contract with electrical purification yet. The other thing is, I think that's critical, and I haven't tackled this yet because I wanted to, but we've got to have a water court in Texas that gets these major water cases done in less than 20 years. We can't wait 10 years or 15 years. Bragg took almost 20, David Gang almost 20. We've got to get these cases done. Spain's got a water court that gets things done in a couple of years. If we're going to run out of water in 2030, like they say, if you look at Ed Vaughn's comment In the 2007 water plan, we need a separate set of water courts that will make these things, we'll get justice in a fair amount of time. And the last thing I'll say, and I hope you don't mind me being so blunt today, but we got to get some right-of-way. We didn't like the water grid idea last session, but if we're going to do a desal plant on the Gulf, we're going to have some right-of-way corridors to get that water moved around this state. If we're going to move water from East Texas, if we're allowed it someday, like the Vista Ridge Pipeline, they've got right-of-way. You know why? Because Gene Dawson did a great job acquiring the right-of-way. He didn't run those pipelines right through the middle of people's property. He followed the highway. There's another way to do right-of-way, and I've been harping about it for a long time. Give people long-term ground leases. Water lines don't melt people like other petroleum lines and things. And give things landowners a reasonable way to where they can participate in this. But we've got to set up right-of-way corridors now. I was an expert witness for Attorney General's office on the Katy Freeway expansion. 30 miles of lawsuits into town and 30 miles out. Took 10 years or longer. Again, if we're going to run out of water, if we need to move water in 2030, now's when we ought to start acquiring right-of-way. Thank you for allowing me to be blunt and to the point.
Appreciate it. Very good testimony. Anybody have any questions? Paul?
Yes, Dr. Porter, thank you for being here. And so you asked one of the solutions, or what are the solutions? One of those, of course, is seawater desal.
Absolutely.
And it's not the total solution, but it is a solution to do it. And the right-of-way is up I-35. And so what I've been proposing and continue to pound the drum on is 5 large desal plants along the Texas coast and 1,200 miles of pipeline. And Texas would be in the water business, and they could establish a water market by producing these seawater desal plants. Nobody else has got the horsepower to do it. In our current system of having the different areas do water plans and putting them in there, and the state doesn't have a way to put something like that in the water plan. So this is one of the things that I think is a long-term solution for the state of Texas is seawater desal.
I couldn't agree more, Paul. Jim Murphy at the GBRA did a study a couple of years ago before he left and located different places around the coast for desal plants. And it can absolutely work. The K. Bailey Hutchinson plants worked for a long time. They were able to get it done in 2 years, mainly because they dumped the brackish water 22 miles away, but it went through Fort Bliss, so they didn't have a right-of-way problem. But you're exactly right. Our long-term solution, I've always said, is brackish groundwater now and desal later.
Seawater.
You know, we built $8 billion in CREZ lines to provide wind energy from West Texas, and yet we start talking about trying to build pipeline grid, and people say, well, there's no way you can afford it. It just doesn't make any sense. If we can spend that much on power lines, we can certainly spend that much on water.
Absolutely, and we need to.
Anybody else? Any questions? Thank you, Dr. Porter. Appreciate it very much. Chair recognizes Ken Kramer from Sierra Club.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm very privileged to be here, and thank you for the invitation to allow me to present the Sierra Club perspective on your interim charge on water marketing. Water marketing often sounds like a very simple concept, but the reality, I think, is much more complicated, and that's probably why we have so many struggles in determining whether we have opportunities for water markets, what that actually means, and how we can use water marketing in a way that protects the environment, but also provides necessary water supplies for people in economic use. I've just indicated very briefly in our written testimony some of the reasons why I think water marketing is a complicated situation. For one thing, we often don't talk about the same thing when we're talking about water marketing. Some of us refer to any type of water transaction as water marketing, including the customary sale of water from a water supplier, perhaps a wholesale supplier to a retail supplier. But I think more and more we tend to talk about water marketing in the context of a fairly sophisticated system in which you have a clear idea how much water is available, what the value or price of that water is, how you can make transactions to exchange water for money, and what the implications of that are, both for the environment and for the places where water is being transported from, in many cases, and how to set up a system and operate a system in a way that is fair to all the interests that are impacted by these water transactions. And of course, water is not just a commodity like soybeans or some other commodity for which there's a market. It's also something that has a very essential part of human life and is also, of course, essential to fish and wildlife and all life on Earth. So it tends to be a very emotional discussion when we're talking about water. And I think complicated today by the fact that much of the water marketing that we're talking about tends to include transfers from rural areas, in the case of groundwater, to urban areas. And that brings all kinds of implications for what the impact of those transfers is going to be on rural economies and rural people. And so it's not a simple situation when we talk about water marketing, and I think we need to keep that in mind because it is complicated, and of course, further complicated by different legal frameworks for groundwater and surface water. The response to how we bring about water marketing where it's appropriate, I think, is going to be fairly complex as well. It's not a simple solution that we can present to make water marketing possible. So in my testimony for Sierra Club, I want to focus on sort of three core principles, if you will, or points that I think speak to how can you make water marketing successful, but in a way that meets the interest of all affected parties and protects the environment at the same time. The first point I want to make is that the ability of a groundwater market to operate successfully probably depends upon the existence of several conditions. And the picture that I'm about to paint is probably an ideal situation and maybe not something you're going to be able to replicate in every circumstance. But I think where you can come close to meeting all these conditions, you have a greater chance of success in creating a groundwater market. One condition is a cap on production. As Chairman Larson knows very well, in the case of the Edwards Aquifer, you have, as a result of court cases and state legislation and the operation of the Edwards Aquifer Authority, a cap on production within which the users of Edwards Aquifer water have to take care of their business. And each of the users within the Edwards Aquifer basically has a very clear delineation of what their right is. Well, that makes it much easier to set a value or a price on water that can then help to enhance the ability to market that water within the system. Those things alone will not really make a successful market, though, because I think you need some other things as well. You need a mechanism for protecting the environmental impacts of groundwater withdrawal and transport. In the case of the Edwards, of course, you have requirements for protection of spring flows from the Comal and San Marcos springs, which are discharge points for the Edwards Aquifer. And I think in other situations, you need some protections for the environment as well, because often a concern about groundwater transport, withdrawal and transport, underlies concerns about spring flows, situations where groundwater may be important underflow for surface water streams, and you don't want to simply impact negatively those parts of the environment within the basin of origin or within the area of origin without paying attention to how you might be able to address or mitigate some of those circumstances in a way that would enhance the favorable attitude toward those groundwater transfers. Also, I think you need some protections for the area of origin in non-environmental circumstances as well. In the case of the Edwards Aquifer, of course, you have certain requirements in state law for maintaining certain agricultural water rights in order to help to maintain the agriculture economy of the western part of the Edwards Aquifer. They're not necessarily perfect. They're the subject of a good deal of controversy right now in terms of what they mean in practice. But I think having some type of mechanism like that to assure that those interests that otherwise might be threatened by the groundwater withdrawal and transport is important to building public acceptance for the possible transport. Also, I think you need, finally, in terms of conditions, an entity, be it a groundwater conservation district or some other entity, that, supported by technical assistance perhaps by the state agencies, has the information and the expertise to be able to make decisions about groundwater withdrawal and transport on the basis of science. So we know clearly what the impacts are when you permit certain volumes of groundwater to be withdrawn and you permit that groundwater to be transported out of the area of origin. The more you have the scientific knowledge and the technical expertise to be able to answer people's questions, I think the more you enhance the prospects for success for groundwater marketing. A second key point that I want to make is that, in our opinion, the current process in the Texas Water Code for consideration of applications for interbasin transfers of surface water, in other words, for surface water marketing, do not represent the obstacle to IBTs that many people assert that they are. Rather, we feel that they are an attempt by the legislature to strike a balance between the needs of those people who are seeking to purchase or move water and those people in the areas of the basin of origin who are giving up that water that potentially could be useful to them and their economies over the long term. Now, I know that there's a lot of controversy about especially the junior water rights provision. I do want to state clearly that the Sierra Club is really neutral on that particular element of the requirements in the current law relating to interbasin transfers. Sometimes an interbasin transfer could be the environmentally preferable solution to a water supply problem. If, for example, you have an existing reservoir like Toledo Bend that has a lot of water that is unsold, not being used, and that water could meet a need of another community outside the basin without that community having to go and build another reservoir somewhere else and having an impact on the environment there, well then the interbasin transfer might be the environmentally preferable solution. So we're not necessarily going to want to undercut any interbasin transfer per se. And the junior water rights provision, therefore, is something we neither support nor oppose. That's for others to argue. But we do feel that the other requirements on interbasin transfers in the water code are realistic. And despite assertions to the contrary, there are interbasin transfers that are being approved by TCEQ, most recently in the case of Lake Ralph Hall and the Lower Bodark Reservoir, both of which involved interbasin transfers of water to the Trinity from the Sulphur in one case and the Red River Basin in the other case. So interbasin transfers of surface water can occur under the current system. One of the things that we think is important in that list of requirements on surface water marketing is the requirement that the applicant for the water demonstrate a certain level of effectiveness in water conservation so that the people who are giving up the water from their basin of origin understand that those who are seeking the water are doing their utmost to conserve water and use it efficiently. They're not just wasting water and then seeking to go get water from another part of the state. They're actually trying to meet a real need for water that can be supplied through conservation and other measures. A third and final point that I want to make is that while the Sierra Club may disagree with others about steps that are needed to facilitate surface water markets, for example, we don't believe all the rhetoric that we hear about the need to, quote, streamline, unquote, the surface water rights permitting process. When I hear the term streamline, and believe me, Mr. Chairman, I wish I had $1 for every time I'd heard the concept of streamlining the surface water permitting process over the past 4 decades, because I'd be a very rich man and I wouldn't even have to come testify at hearings probably. But when I hear that term, I think steamrolling interveners. I don't think streamlining the process. It's really, every time I've seen it applied, it's primarily to try to keep interveners out of the process, even if those interveners have a perfect need and right to be in the process because it affects, the permit potential affects them. But we do agree with many who have promoted water markets in surface water situations that there are certain steps that could be taken that would facilitate surface water markets, but they will also have other benefits for water policy as well. One is establishing water masters in other surface water basins of Texas where the position's not been created. In our opinion, most of the water masters that have been operating in certain basins in Texas have been very successful. And having more water masters provides more certainty for people who want to market surface water because you have, I think, better enforcement of water rights within a river basin. You have more information usually about the surface water conditions in the basin, and you have relationships built up between the water master and the water rights holders so that there is, I think, if you are good at it, a trust and a credibility that is built by the water masters in overseeing surface water rights enforcement within that basin. And all those things can be helpful to people who want certainty for a surface water market. But they also obviously have major benefits for water policy in general. A second point in terms of things where I think we agree with many of those promoting water marketing is updating and enhancing water availability models for surface water. I know that's another interim charge, but I think it does relate to this one as well, because the more up-to-date, real-time information that we have about surface water conditions, the better able policymakers will be to make decisions about water marketing, about water rights permitting, and I think would actually be one of the things that would enhance or streamline, if you will, the surface water permitting process if we had better water availability models. And finally, I think that we should also consider how we may promote and support the use of the Texas Water Trust, which was established back in the 1990s under the auspices of the Texas Water Development Board for the banking of water rights. This particular trust, of course, there are separate components of it. Some are simply for banking surface water rights in general, but then there are specific abilities to bank water rights for environmental protection. And I think to the extent that we can come up with ways or mechanisms for those seeking surface water permits and movement of surface water to be able to bank some of that water in the trust to protect in-stream flows and freshwater inflows to basin estuaries, you build more support for, and I think you take away some of the arguments of those opposed to certain water marketing proposals. Because one of the big concerns from our point of view is protecting the environment in all the water marketing and water transporting that we're talking about. And if we can come up with a way of doing that, then that takes away, I think, a certain level of opposition that otherwise you'd have for water markets. So my hope is that we can concentrate on those things where we have pretty widespread agreement although obviously there's opposition in some quarters to water masters. But where we have fairly widespread agreement, or can build that agreement, then I think we can further the interest of those who want to do appropriate water transfers, but we can also protect the environment and other interests at the same time. Thanks for the opportunity to present.
Thank you,
this
Ken.
perspective.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Kramer? Thank you very much. Very
Thank you.
insightful. The last witness we have is Kim Wilson with TCEQ. Yeah, Kim, if you'd just state your name and the organization.
Sure. Can y'all hear me? Okay, it's not as obvious here, but thank you, Chairman and committee members. I'm Kim Wilson. I'm the director for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality's Water Availability Division. And within the Water Availability Division, we house our water rights permitting program. And so I've been asked to come and talk to you all under the water markets charge about interbasin transfers and about TCEQ suspension and curtailments during water shortages. We've had some discussion on interbasin transfers so far, so I'm going to streamline a little bit of what I have in my testimony, but it's there for your reference. An interbasin transfer, of course, is a diversion and transfer of state water from one river basin to another. And in Texas, we have 131 water rights outside of the Rio Grande that authorize interbasin transfers. Some of those water rights have multiple interbasin transfers that are authorized. So there's a total of 186 interbasin transfers that we have authorized across the state. As was noted before, Senate Bill 1 in 1997 brought some changes to interbasin transfers, added conditions for public notice and public meeting requirements, added the junior provision, as well as required the commission to weigh factors including the need for water in both basins, alternatives to the IBT, water conservation, economic impacts, environmental concerns, and other items. It also provided some exemptions to the requirements it added. The more common exemptions are for small water transfers, less than 3,000 acre feet, for transfers from a river basin to its adjoining coastal basin, and then transfers within a county or within a municipality, or transfers from one part of a retail public service area within a public water system to another. And that last example I gave you is what we're seeing more commonly today as a public water system expands its service area and crosses a basin boundary. We're seeing those types of interbasin transfers as well as those within a municipality and a county. Rounding out this topic, I'll provide just a few more statistics. I said a total of 186 interbasin transfers across the state. About 127 of those were authorized prior to Senate Bill 1. Post Senate Bill 1, we've had 59 exemptions authorized, or 59 interbasin transfers authorized, 52 of those are exempt, 7 of them were non-exempt. And of the 7 that were non-exempt, 6 were for new authorizations of water. So junior provision applied but didn't in those circumstances. So moving on to TCEQ's suspensions and curtailments of water during shortages. Different from today's rainy conditions, from 2009 to 2015, we saw really dry conditions across the state, and they've come back during the summer since then. During that time, we promulgated some rules that talked about how we would suspend and curtail water rights during those times. And those rules allowed us to exempt public water systems and power generation facilities from those suspensions and curtailments. And in response to a priority call in 2012, we did just that. We suspended water rights and we exempted public water systems and power generation facilities from those suspensions. And that action was, went to court. And in 2003, the district court ruled that our rules were invalid, specifically because they did exempt those public water systems and power generation facilities and didn't follow the priority doctrine. And so what that means for us now is when we're faced with drought conditions in the state and there are water shortages, we'll be following the priority doctrine when we suspend water rights. That means that the considerations we had for public health, safety, and welfare in not exempting those public water systems, power generation facilities will not be able to take into consideration and will just go in priority order. There is a provision under the water code that would allow one of those facilities to apply for an emergency transfer of water. The thing to note with that is when they've applied for that and we grant it, they're required to pay fair market value for the water that gets transferred, as well as any damages that result from the transfer. And so, of course, that could be quite a limitation to someone looking for that emergency transfer of water. And I'm happy to answer any questions you all have.
Anybody have any questions for Kim?
Just had a
Yeah,
question,
James.
and this really isn't about IBT, it's about water rights in general and the length of time it takes. There was a recommendation earlier by Dr. Porter about a task force to streamline, I know streamline's not a word that you like, but to decrease the amount of time, and really it's been a theme, I think several other people hit on it, in the way that deters actual transactions is something that requires 900 days. May mean just, even though it may make sense, it may be good for the environment, it may be works for everybody, works for the landowner, works for the end user, but 900 days is simply not, it kills the transaction. Have there been any internal studies as to what takes the 900 days, how much of that is value added versus how much of that is just kind of intentionally stopping a transaction?
Sure. I don't know. We've spent our last 3 years focused on streamlining our process to
And to what end? To what end? What are
Sure.
the results of streamlining?
So we had quite a backlog about 3 years ago. I think we had about 355 permits at the height. We've whittled that down to just less than 180 now. 20 of those are contested, so they'll be making their way through the contested case process. And that, of course, will add time to a process. Those remaining 160 or so, what we see left, we've got more things that need water availability modeling.
So 160, when you're saying the 900 and 160, you're giving me backlog numbers, right?
Yes.
That's the number of backlogs. So how many
Yes.
cases do you get annually?
We get about 125 on average. That's how many water rights we get per year.
So wouldn't it be like a 7-year backlog? Am I missing something?
3 to 4 year backlog
Yeah,
that we started
125 a
with.
year. How do you get to 900? I'm
But
trying
I
to figure,
think they
am I
were
talking apples and oranges?
No, I think what was referenced earlier is a 900-day processing time.
Okay.
I
I thought you said that was also what your backlog was. I'm
It
sorry.
was 355.
300, okay. So I was just wrong, sorry. So you went from 350 in backlog to 160 or so.
That's about where we are today.
Okay.
And we're hoping.
And so you get 125 is your input though. That's what you're getting. You're getting 125 a year approximately.
Approximately.
Okay.
And so that's our goal, is to reduce that overall number pending to about the 125 range. And we hope we're going to get there fairly soon. What we've also done is we took a look at, not all water rights are the same. Those that require modeling to determine water availability or impacts on water availability take more processing. Those that don't require that type of modeling, and examples of those are permits on the Rio Grande, permits for a change in use or change in place of use. They don't require modeling, so we've segregated those off into their own process.
Right.
And are pushing those through much more quickly these days. We've reduced the backlog much more significantly on those types of applications because they can move more quickly through our process. So we've made those efforts, and then we've just really focused on training our staff so that they're able to process permits in a more timely manner and tracking what we're doing.
Great.
One of the things I think we've also done that's been really successful, and a lot of the folks that submit water rights to us have been a big part of this, is we revised our application form to make sure that it's complete and thorough and asks for what we need, so it reduces the back and forth in us collecting information. But folks have also come into us as they're developing those applications, and they've talked to us ahead of time, sometimes just concept of their project. Then as they're starting to get it ready and when they have a final application, have said, do we have everything you need here to process this application? Those applications have moved much more quickly. So where folks partner with us, especially from concept all the way through developing that application, that really helps us give them a lot of feedback, make sure we're getting what we need as they develop the project. And like I said, lots of people have done that with us in the last 3 years, and that has helped tremendously in processing those new applications.
So the days and the delay have gone down. You don't have, I guess, there hadn't been data or study. Do y'all track that on a monthly basis? What's your average length of permitting? Is that something we could get?
We have.
And I know there's different types, right? I mean, you have contested, so that maybe 3 or 4 or 5 buckets to go, hey, a contested case hearing is averaging 500 days or whatever, and then do y'all have any of that data internally? Do you track that to measure yourself, or is it?
We do. What I find is, since we still do have backlogged applications, and some of those have been in-house for quite a while, those numbers are still pretty heavily skewed by backlogged applications.
Well, they're heavily skewed by the facts? I mean,
Just-
they're heavily skewed by the fact that we haven't taken action on them.
They're
that's-
heavily skewed by the fact that we just have not gotten out those backlogged applications.
Okay.
So you're still seeing
But-
a better example probably, and I hope that this helps a little bit, with our fast track applications, those that don't require modeling. We've reduced processing time on those to less than 300 days in most cases. We have some outliers. We also have some that we've processed within a couple of weeks. But on those, we've been able to reduce those. In some cases, some of the backlogged ones we had when we started had been in-house for several years, but now our average processing time on those is less than 300 days.
So, I mean, it sounds like a lot of very good work has been done on it, and that's commendable. But I also think that as a legislative body, we ought to have some type of data to say, are we continuing that process? Are we going to continue to improve that process? Is that something y'all have, or is that something that we would have to request that we actually get data of how long things are taking?
I'm happy to provide y'all that data.
I mean, I assume you have it internally. I don't know how you manage an organization if you don't, because you're obviously already made some good progress to improvements. So it is something you have.
It is something I have. I don't have the numbers in front of me
Oh, yeah.
here today, so.
I'm not asking for the.
Okay. But I'm happy to provide those to y'all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Anybody else have any questions for Kim? Hey, thank you for the testimony. Why don't you sit right there, because we're going to go to the next interim charge. Rodney, thank you, and Charles and Chloe and Ken for your testimony today. Why don't we go into interim charge number 7, update on the water availability models for river basins and state. Why don't you take it from there?
Okay, thank you. Again, Kim Wilson with Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And water availability is a key component in our review of a water right application. And we use the water availability models to conduct that review. Our water availability models are structured to implement prior appropriation and other state laws, rules, and policies. And that ensures that we're making sure that senior water rights are protected, and we're only allocating that water that is available to allocate. Years ago, prior to the WAMs, we had some legacy models. We did things on a case-by-case basis. But with Senate Bill 1, the legislature was looking for us to have a more standardized method for evaluating water availability across the state. And so we were directed to develop water availability models. And beginning in 1998 through 2004, we developed a model engine, and we developed data sets for each of the 23 river basins in Texas. The legislature, over several biennium, appropriated $12.6 million for that effort. That $12.6 million was contracted to Texas A&M University to develop the model engine itself. And then we contracted primarily with consulting firms to develop the data sets that go into the models. And so since those models were developed, we've had an ongoing contract with Texas A&M University to continue to make updates to the functionality of the model engine itself. And we take input from stakeholders in considering the prioritization of the updates we're going to look at. We've also made some minor modifications to the data in the original naturalized flow data sets, and those are in response to issues raised by regional planning groups and other stakeholders. And then there are 3 ongoing projects to update naturalized flows. We've done about an 80% update of the naturalized flows for the Brazos water availability model. Those were done by the Brazos River Authority in conjunction with requirements under their systems operation permit. The Lower Colorado River Authority is in the process of updating the naturalized flows for the Colorado River currently. The TCEQ had done that update through 2013. The LCRA is going to complete an additional update through 2016, and that's ongoing. And then the Riverbend Water Resources District is funding updates to the naturalized flows in the Sulphur River Basin, and that will use data through 2017. And as they're working through that process, we've been working with them to make sure that the product all of these folks develop as something that we can use for regulatory purposes.
Interesting on the initiative that those 3 basins are taking. Sat down with the Brazos folks yesterday, and apparently there was a system operation permit that was agreed upon that added another 100,000 acre feet of water. I know that was very diligent on their part, and to reach out and with TCQ and develop a compromise on that. And so I think these other basins will probably be following suit, what the Brazos did, to see if there's additional water, but they're going to have to do a WAM, and the state, for whatever reason, we haven't fulfilled our, at least what our goal was in hitting these large rivers along with some of the others. The prioritization, if the WAMs and the funding became available, I know that Senator Perry has made this a charge in the next session. What would be the rivers that we'd look at in the next year, and then going from there?
I think what we had looked at before is trying to focus on where a new drought of record might be most likely. Drought conditions, which ultimately will determine what you see as water available in the models, was what kind of drove prioritization. I think we feel like finishing off the Brazos. It's 80% done, that remaining 20%. And then perhaps the Neches Red and Rio Grande following that.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Kim?
I do.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kim, that list again, you said Brazos, Nature's Red? Or
I think we
Nature's?
looked at the prioritization list that I had seen was Brazos, Neches, Red, and Rio Grande.
Okay. How much did TCEQ, did y'all put in your LAR for the WHAM modeling?
We haven't made an LAR request.
Oh, you didn't request any?
No.
So how much would you need to do these three?
The estimates that I think we're looking at, I have to do some quick math here, I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, you know.
About 2 million for
About 2 million.
those.
And I was looking here historically back after SB1 for a couple of, or three, I guess, sessions, we had a direct appropriation for WHAM funding. Have we done that since 2003?
No.
Okay. So basically, as far as the WHAM modeling, y'all have just been taking that out of your general operating and applying that for WHAM funding, modeling internally?
We've taken a small amount each year to fund updates to the functionality of the model engine itself. But updates to the data sets have been very minor and have been things we've done in-house.
You know, just some constructive advice here for the agency. You know, it seems like over the years, I hear consistently from a lot of people that we need updated WHAMs for very meritorious reasons. And in thinking about doing that, you know, I think the legislature would, at least members on this committee and probably a lot of others, would be very favorably trying to help you guys with some funding, but it would be helpful if you would ask for that in your LAR so that we can construct that budget with a direct appropriation in mind. So just, you may want to share that with some of the folks back at the agency, because I do think that's something that is widely supported and is desperately needed. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it. Chair recognizes Bob Brandis. Bob, if you'd come up. Bob, just state your name and the organization with, and I think if you could go back and address Chairman Ashby's question as far as the cost, you know, as far as what's your understanding what the cost would be for those three basins?
I'd be happy to. My name is Bob Brandis. I'm here today on behalf of Texas Water Conservation Association. I am co-chair of TWCA's Surface Water Committee. As you may recall, TWCA was in support of updating the WHAMs and pursuing funding with the legislature last session, and we are supportive today and would support additional funding for this particular effort. We have a lot of members in TWCA who have a lot of experience with the WHAMs. They use them every day. A number of these individuals were involved in the original development of the WHAMs back in the 90s. So we feel like we have experience to bring to bear in terms of how this might play out. I think we have prepared a priority list that I think you have before you of on a basin by basin basis of how we see the priorities for developing or in updating these WHAMs. The upper echelon of that, the top 5 or 6, it's maybe not that important in which the exact order they're in, but these are basins that, for the most part, have experienced new droughts of record since the late 90s when the last database ended that are in the current WHAMs. A lot of these basins have proposed projects that we feel like need to be subjected to the most recent hydrologic data, and that's why they're included in that list. I think last time we thought we put together a total number of about $8 million if you were to do them all, and that certainly is, in our opinion, is not necessary to do them all. That's kind of what the total price tag came out. The three that were mentioned, I don't remember exactly. Red River, Rio Grande, and I don't know the third.
Nueces.
Nueces. Those happen to be the top three on our list, and they total about, looks like $2 million, $2.5 million, somewhere in there for those three. So, I would like to point out that the sulfur is unique in that, Riverbend Water Resources District has taken upon themselves to update that particular WAM. That sulfur WAM was number one on our list, last time we reported to the legislature, and so it needed to be updated, and now it will be by the end of this year, so it drops to the bottom of the list, fortunately. But we do have these others that we feel important, that they're important to be updated. So that's all I have to report today, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody have any questions for Bob? Obviously, importance as we get more and more compression on these basins, we're going to have better data, and that's changing not only when we have drought experiences, but just the demands on it. And I think that it's critical for the state to fully understand, at least on a more periodic basis than what we've got right now, exactly what's available in those basins. So we appreciate your advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, that concludes the testimony for interim charge 7. Let's move to the next one. Examine the potential value of the necessary elements, implications of a broad-based information and awareness campaign regarding water issues and water stakeholders, educators, and communication experts. The chair recognizes Michael Harmon and Rye Clifton. Y'all can come up and state your name and the organization you're with. I saw this presentation a few weeks ago, and this is pretty cutting edge stuff.
Yeah, my name is Rye Clifton. I'm with Harbinger. We're a data analytics, kind of artificial intelligence company.
And I'm Michael Harmon. I'm the executive creative director of Harmon Friday. We're a creative agency.
Thanks for having us.
And you're working with?
We're working with the Meadows the Meadows Center. They've funded this project, and then we've been under having some advisory from the Texas Water Development Board as well.
Okay.
And I'll say this is turned into about an hour-and-a-half presentation, and we're going to try to get through it in about 15 minutes. So we won't go into the nuts and bolts of the how, but we'll give you a taste of what this is, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
So the way that we got here, Roy Spence, who's one of the founders of GSD&M, one of the authors of Don't Mess with Texas, had talked to a bunch of water folks and got excited and talked to Andy and said, what would this look like as a campaign? How would it come to life? And then Roy came to me and said, I think that what we're doing with data could be a new way to really reach people, be able to tap into their passion points of what individuals care about and reach them in a new way. And so we got to talking, and then as we did this segmentation, got Michael and Harmon Friday to come along and really turn this into the campaign that you're going to see today. So if we jump to the next slide, this is a little bit of a setup that Texans come in all shapes and sizes and motivations. We need a campaign platform that's flexible enough to reach them all. Texans who want to clean it up, Texans who are concerned that we might run out, Texans who will do anything they can to help, and Texans who ask, why change my ways? And if we do it right, we'll even influence that small group of Texans who say, it's not my problem. And so what we did is the Meadows Center had a survey that had been a statewide survey from the Carol Baker and the Texas Water Foundation. And what we were able to do is go through this survey, and a lot of times when you've seen surveys before, you see question 1 and 30% of people feel one way and 40% of people feel one way. You go to the next question, and every question is looked at in isolation. what we're doing is we can take numeric and categorical data and start clustering those to find out where the groups of commonality between different people and have these clusters. And so if you go to the next slide, this is the very, very brief overview. Keep going to the next slide. We have 5 groups that came out of here. So we took this original survey and we had 5 groups. There's the Clean It Up, which comes in at about 19%. Why change my ways? And I'll talk a little bit more about each one of these. What can I do to help? People that say it's not my problem at 14%. And then I hope we don't run out. The people that are more conscious of drought, they've probably been through one before. And then through all these 50 questions, we can go through and look at just 5 of these questions and know to a 90% accuracy that we know which group they'll fall into. Those 5 questions we've got on the next 2 slides up. Those 5 questions, when you think of water in Texas, what's the first thing that comes to mind? So that was an open-ended question. You know, a lot of verbatims, it's hard to figure out where they fall. Who do you think uses the most water? That was a multiple choice question that was in there. What do you think is the biggest environmental problem in Texas? Another big list of questions. Do you think you could do more to conserve water was one of the questions. And there was another question in there just for context of, do you think your neighbors could do more to conserve water? A lot of people think that they're doing a better job than their neighbors are. And how concerned are you about your water bill? So of all the 50 or so questions, these are the 5 questions that if we know the answer to this, we can figure out which group people are going to fall into. And then from there we go and we have a matching survey. We ask those 5 questions along with a bunch of other questions, and we can start to add texture to these different groups. And then from there we can go and we can target on a one-to-one level. So if it's the group that is worried about cleanliness, we can lead with messages that are about cleanliness. If there's a group that's worried about running out, we can have more of a message about that. There's a group that needs more practical information, so we can have here's how you can help. So let's talk about those groups. If you skip forward 2 slides, the next one is just a header. Their groups, there we go. So 19% Clean It Up. These are prideful Texans. These are the people that have lived in Texas the longest and consider themselves Texans. We asked that in the follow-up. This is a group who remembers Don't Mess with Texas from the beginning and sees dirty water as an extension of pollution. So one of the things here is that going in deeper, these people were visual in nature. They responded to things that were visual. If they saw something that was wrong or out of place, they recognize it. 25%, why change my ways? This is the most interesting group to me. They tend to do things the way they do them because they've always done them. They're not going to change their ways unless there's a practical reason to do so. This also happens to be the group that is the biggest offenders. They water their lawn more than they should. They're least likely to fix a faucet if it's a little bit leaky, and they shower longer than 10 minutes. And so they were the biggest offenders. They also don't think that there's a problem, but they're willing to change if they see that there's a practical reason to. What can I do to help? This is the group that they'll respond to just about anything. They want to kind of leave no footprint behind. They want to leave the world a better place. And so anything we put out there, they're probably going to respond to. We got 14% that's not my problem. These people are resistant to change. They don't appreciate the problem. This would be the group that would be hardest to convert. But the thing is, they're good stewards of water. They don't waste water. And so, if you're spending money against this isn't the group that would probably go after or prioritize. And then 18, hope we don't run out. These are people that have probably experienced some sort of drought before. And they're eager for information from the state and want others to be aware. And so going through and saying, what would a campaign about water be like? It's important to think about, well, what's one kind of unifying message that can hold everything together, but also know that we can kind of crank up those dials of what the passion points for people are. So when we talk to them, we can talk to them about what they care about and why that matters. And so the next slide, the creative challenge is make the importance of water palpable. A lot of times I'll say tangible or palpable, but make it where you can touch it and feel it. Go into the heartstrings of what these individuals care about and talk to them on that one-to-one level so that they're more excited about it. And when we talked to Roy on the next slide, Roy Spence again about Don't Mess with Texas, he said that's the thing that really ended up working with Don't Mess with Texas is you've got this pride plus action, right? You're telling people what to do, but you're going through their heartstrings. So this isn't just saying don't mess, it's Don't Mess with Texas. So how do we make this a Texas campaign, something that is important to us as a state, but also having where we can turn up those individual passion points. And then the next slide, and I'll let Michael talk a little bit, is how do we make this something that people are prideful about? And we call it the bumper sticker test, right? Is this something that you're going to put on the back of your truck, on the back of your cooler? Is this something that, is going to say enough to get people to kind of nod their head and say, hey, what is that about? And so what you'll see, I think we've really nailed that. We started in 3 directions and 3 campaigns, and we had a meeting down in San Marcos with a bunch of stakeholders from different organizations, different backgrounds, and different needs, and narrowed things down to one campaign that I think everybody is really excited about, and we're excited about as well. So here it is. Next slide.
So if you go to the next slide. So the campaign idea we came up with after we presented those 3 and got everybody excited, we whittled it down to a campaign called Do or Dry. If you jump to the next slide, I'm going to let Riley read this manifesto real quick.
Yeah, so, a manifesto, this is to kind of set the mood of what we want the campaign to be. So Texas, it's big, it's beautiful, and it gets hotter than a stolen tamale. But imagine that heat without any water to cool us off, to wet our whistles, wash our cars, and catch us when we let go of that rope swing. Without water, the Lone Star would be drier than the heart of a haystack. And a Texas that's dry is not a Texas that's worth singing about. That's why it's our duty to do something about it and start respecting our water. Start paying attention to it. Start being smarter with how we use it. This is not something to be taken lightly. Just like when it comes to keeping her beautiful, we don't mess with her. When it comes to protecting our water supply, it's do or dry.
So if we jump to the next slide. So this is the campaign look and feel of the logo that we came up with. So again, kind of going back to that pride plus action and tying in Texas to the look and feel. Obviously the logo's encapsulated in the state of Texas, and we used a font that's a little bit more of a heritage font, has a little bit, it's not perfect, it's got some rough edges to it as well. And then the colors I chose for this is, the red, white, and blue, but still a little bit more of a washed out red, and then kind of like more of a lake kind of color blue. And it's hard to tell on this screen, but it's a deeper kind of navy blue for the state of Texas. And then the water droplet obviously being blue. And we played with it a couple different ways. That water droplet kind of running out the Gulf of Texas could also be seen as red as well. So kind of looking at, the state could be bleeding or the state's running out of water. Either way, but there's some nice motion that goes through the message. So the do being the big call to action, do something, act, or else in the future we could be running dry, and that could be you could be emptying your pocketbooks for paying too much for water, or we could literally be running out of water.
And you'll see in the further executions that do is just a flexible word. We can use that in a lot of different ways, the things that you should do, how you can take action, how you can change your ways or change your behaviors. I'm going to jump to the next slide, please.
And this one, like I said, we kind of played with the bumper sticker test a little bit, and I think this is a good gauge of does this live with other brands that other people care about. And I just happened to live next door to the Yeti store, so I walked over there and just took a picture of that. And so here's a handful of stickers on a cooler, and I think that's a pretty good gauge of the kinds of things people tend to decorate their coolers with, or I say cars, but not so much as anymore. But it seems to look really nice on this cooler and fits in well. And then if you keep going, we're going to walk through some executions of how we brought this brand to life. So what you've seen so far is what the brand look and feel is. And then this is kind of some examples of some advertising, some posters, and things like that could come to life.
Yeah, so one of the things we were inspired by was Texas Monthly has this great article of 150 Texas sayings. And we went through that and kind of mined it and started thinking about what are future Texas sayings? What are things that people might be saying, 20 years from now? And took that to heart and thought about it with the campaign in mind. So do your part, or Texas will be so dry that catfish will be carrying canteens. Protect our water supply, do or dry. Or stop waiting, or Texas will be so dry we'll be spitting cotton. Protect our water supply, do or dry. So things that feel kind of naturally Texan. Having things, little elements on there of things that are distinctly Texas, having the water up top. You can see these as a series of, a dozen posters that might be posted somewhere, or print ads, or even banner ads online. And again, depending on what those needs are, what the situation was, you might regionalize those, you might target those depending on who we were talking to. Go to the next
Go to the
slide.
next one. And this is another example of a potential poster that we could make. So really just looking at the state of Texas in more of an abstract way, zooming into all the waterways in Texas. So the headline here being Water, the Lifeblood of Texas. So really just tapping into the heartstrings of, it really makes us who we are as Texans. If we keep going, another idea we had is taking advantage of some outdoor boards, or, you know, of course we would do some sort of outdoor. We thought about this a little bit more creatively and thought, you know, there's water towers all over Texas. Could be really neat to put do or dry or some sort of messaging on water towers around Texas. Even if we just do it one time, you know, that would be amazing for some headlines as well.
Keep moving.
Okay. And then, so Rice spoke a little bit about the individual groups that we'd be messaging to. So if you hop to the next slide, I'll walk you through a few examples of how we might target people. And for this example, we just use Facebook just to keep it consistent, but you can see how this could play out in other social media ways or PR. So the first one we're going to talk about is Clean It Up. So again, these are prideful Texans. They remember Don't Mess, and they see the dirty water as an extension of pollution. So in this instance, took you know, recreation as an example. So the headline here being Enjoy a Lake Without Speed Bumps, Keep Our Water Clean. And so you can kind of see the look and feel is just nice, you know, vibrant photography. And then, you know, at the very top, you can kind of see the ripples of the water. So a nice way to tie it in is every time you see these posts, there might be a little ripple on the top to where you kind of immediately recognize that it's the Do or Dry campaign. And then you can also see that, I didn't touch on this earlier, but a nice thing about the brand that we came up with is it really shrinks down really well, and it's very easily recognizable at a small size, even at, you know, that little profile picture size. It's easily scalable, and that's something we always have to think about. So when it's tiny like this, can you see it?
One of the other details that I love about this is with the water kind of ripple up top, doing things that if you're on Facebook or if you're on Instagram, you're used to seeing rectangle images. And so paying attention to what the background is being white and doing something that kind of breaks that mold, jumps out. And it's little things like this, having this where it might be an animated GIF rather than a still image so that there's a little bit of motion, doing things that just stop the scroll to get you to pause and think for just a minute, and doing that in a way that's going to be relevant to you is what's important.
Yeah. Okay, we can hop to the next slide. So another example, so Why Change My Ways? This group does things the same way they always have. They respond to practical advice and understand the benefits. So in this case, actually giving some, you know, some tips and stuff like that. So the headline here would be Drip, Drip, Drip. That's the sound of your hard-earned money going down the drain. And so here, kind of linking to a blog post, it might be 7 revolutionary ways to stop the bleeding on your monthly water bill. And so we would also have a component of this campaign where we would have a website, which similar to most campaigns, you know, you can click through to. We'd have blog posts and try to keep that content relevant as we move forward. Okay, if we hop to the next slide. What can I do to help? So most likely you take action, and we'll appreciate tips and information. These are the champions of the cause and the most educated on issues. And so here, just real simple, stop a leak, save a lake. And so just showing maybe an outdoorsman fishing.
And I think this is one that is the most modular of everything we've seen, where that has a faucet, it has someone fishing, and it's talking about a lake. So think of that. That could be a faucet. That could be a shower. That could be washing your car. That could be a bunch of things that are silhouetted on there of ways that people are using water. That could be anything from, you know, water skiing to fishing to you know, using water in West Texas with oil or natural gas. Like, there's different things that people care about, and being able to change those in and out and having a framework to do that is the important thing to take away from this.
Yeah. And then if we hop to the next one, don't run out. So they understand supply issues, and they may have experienced a drought. They're eager for information from the state and want others to be aware. So here, just kind of speaking to the fact that, you know, everybody has to pay for water as well. It's not necessarily just our water is a privilege worth paying for, is the headline here, and maybe showing some kids playing in some fountains. And then let's jump to the next one. And this is the Not My Problem. Again, this is that group that they're resistant to change and don't appreciate the problem. They'd be the most difficult to convince, but they're also the group that we're not as worried about because they're really not wasting water. So I think just doing some humor here. You'll never believe some of these brilliant ideas. And then 10 ways to use your boat after the lake dries up. So in this case, making a nice little bike. Okay, and let's keep moving on. And then we just talked about we'd also try to reach out to some local influencers in Texas to also write some articles on our behalf, or at least give them content to where, you know, those writers could supply content to their own audience as well. So influencer marketing is a really good way to go about it. So people they already trust and are saying the messages that really matter.
A big thing that I think about a lot with a campaign is not having any roadblocks. Get somebody interested and then let them go as deep as they want. And so having articles that link in, or having multiple front doors to a single article, tying into those passion points to get people to want to know more. And then after that article, have more things. So have it where things are tied together, kind of the plumbing of a campaign on the background, but have it where you've got a lot of starting points to get as many people interested as possible.
Okay. We can go ahead, keep going. And so like we said, a lot of the content that we just showed would link through to a website, doordry.org is what we've put forward so far.
And we've got several versions of that, Do or Dry Texas, and different variations of that to hold on to it.
Right. And then if you keep going, I'll touch that.
Sure. So we'll sponsor local weather reports. So the same way that sometimes they have a smog index or traffic reports, we could go in and take days that say 100 plus or high evaporation days and have that as something on the local news. So when you go in, you could go into the key reports and have that in with the news. We know that when people are watching the news, they're tuned in a different way than when they're watching a sitcom or something. They're open to information. So going and saying, hey, it's going to be especially hot today. Make sure that you're not out there watering on the hottest of days, or whatever that kind of practical advice to go along with that would be.
If you jump to the next one.
And we know that, this is all about do or dry, but we've also got floods and hurricanes and days like today. And so having things that are paying attention to what's going on out there so that we can turn down the volume when there's a lot of rain, or go in and reemphasize what do means in the context of that. Here are things that you can do to help. So it's still about taking action until it's still about water, but it's more on the do in those cases and less on the dry. And then next slide, and this is another example of how we can get in and be really practical and targeted right in the place where it matters most. So think about going into local hardware stores or partnering with Lowe's, Home Depot, or Ace, and having tags on things that say a leaky faucet can cost you hundreds of gallons per month, protect our water supply, do or dry. So having things that don't seem like normal advertising media, but having it where you can have practical advice of how you can jump in and fix something at home, and how a project that you could do could actually help. Next slide. We know that having this one-to-one messaging is really important, and that we can optimize towards that. But having something that is a Texas passion point, football is definitely one of those things. And there's a lot of different ways to go in and work within a stadium. There's not a whole lot of people wanting to sponsor the Water Boy. And so going in and saying, hey, we're going to be the do or dry water break, getting people to think about water for just a few seconds during a football game, that's something that we know that everybody in Texas is tuning into, and that could be a great way to leverage that same message, but in a way that's appropriate for football. And then the next few slides just show how this keeps coming to life. If we're going to jump to the next slide, this comes to life as a T-shirt. That it's bigger and simpler. It's just the logo on there, just one of these phrases, but those things that, what's your shirt mean? What does that mean? It's kind of a conversation starter, and we think that's important. Next slide.
Yeah, if you keep going, again, just apparel. So we could do hat patches, things like that. And these could either be giveaways, that they could also be for sale on a website, just another revenue stream as well. If you keep going, possibly partner with people like Yeti. On the next slide, to do things like that are more statewide, and again, these could be handouts or actually potentially partnering with somebody like Yeti to put these on the Ramblers.
And then we've got just a couple more examples of where this can come to life. Influencers, culture, and PR. I think during Harvey last year, we saw how much outpouring of support there was, especially with musicians and coming together. So what are ways that we can re-engage those people and say, hey, here's how you can keep that conversation going? And so on the next slide, there's a lot of Texans who have done different things. Roy Spence is close friends with McConaughey. There's just a lot of people that we can tap into, a lot of people that have already kind of raised their hand, and so reaching back out to them is the real point of this. Is water picking or the?
Yeah, you need Jimbo Fisher. I don't see him.
We can get him. I mean, squares with people in them. I can make those all day long.
If anybody knows Willie, that'd be great.
And then just 2 or 3 more little things. If we jump to the next slide, some PR stuff that could be fun. Think about ACL was the past couple of weekends. It was, 80, 90 degrees out there. Everybody's hot. So having a big water station, giving away water bottles, you go out there and there's only, a fifth of a bottle of water. Like, what are you doing handing me empty water bottles? But it has that moment to get people to think, or go to HEBs across the state. All you need is that 2 or 3 minutes where the cameras show up to say we've got a whole wall of water bottles that are empty to make that statement and to talk about. And what does that mean? So have it caveated, these would be reusable water bottles and we'd fill them up with people so they wouldn't leave angry. But we want to have that learning moment to think about for a few minutes. And then a good campaign always has water cooler talk, right? So let's do it on a water cooler. You can have thermochromatic paint that changes with temperature. So a Texas that as the water cooler dries, the color on Texas actually goes down, so it looks like it's draining out is a way to get conversation going around the water cooler. And then the next couple of slides, youth and education. I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'll tell you, there's nothing more persuasive than a 5-year-old telling you not to text in the car over and over again. You pick up the phone and they're just on you. And so getting to the youth and giving them things to talk and to care about is a great way to do it. And so we talked about scouts and summer camp and having patches that go along with the do or dry, and having a curriculum that we can help put in place and help that kind of the youth carry that message so that they're thinking about it from a young age. And then the next one is really doing that with a classroom. Multimedia projects is a big thing that's happening now, using some of these influencers to be a judge to go through and say, McConaughey went and picked my project, and that's going to be some of the communication going forward. I think that's a really important way, and I know that there's several education programs that have been done in the past, and I think this can adapt to any of those. And then you want to take...
And then actually looking at, Texas businesses, if you go to the next slide, maybe making a Texas water responsibility stamp. So actually making people make some sort of criteria for how a water's water responsible, and actually being able to put this stamp on their products or on their website or something like that, kind of similar to Energy Star or Better Business Bureau or FSC LEED certification, whatever it might be. It's just another way for companies to say that they're being a responsible citizen of Texas or a responsible business in Texas. It'd be a nice way to tie this campaign into commercial businesses.
So I think that is our song and dance.
I think that's
James, you had a question?
That last one kind of intrigued me. Who decides whether they're responsible or not?
I think you'd have to set up a criteria, just like some of the other ones do, of what that means. I think that would be different for different organization, and that would probably open up a whole other can of worms of what that would be. But having something that the businesses can aspire to and that they can put out there proudly, I think there's a big LEED certification right as you walk into this building.
Okay.
But as far as who would manage that, we don't know that at this point. We'd have to figure that out.
I think I got by the end. I mean, the theme is conserve. Is that the main one, or is it more focused on environmental? Who ends up setting up the messaging? I mean, is it environmental, or is it conservative, or I'm sorry, conservation? Is it primarily conservation?
The real task is, or the real thought going into this is, the more people know and understand about water, the better stewards they are of it. They understand that it's not something to take for granted, that it takes the pipes and the water towers and all the infrastructure that goes in. And that's where, really got interested by this group that kind of knows enough that they do things the way that they do things, and they're not going to change their ways unless there is a reason. So it's not about environmental or conservative. It's about water education, knowing that when people know more, they make better decisions. And then being able to create a campaign that has an umbrella that's flexible enough to go in and say, well, this person cares about, they've been through a drought and they want to know what they can do to prevent a drought. Well, that's one set of information. the other side might be groups that want to clean it up, and they're all about the purity or the, what goes into the water, and they love skiing and fishing and want to preserve it for a different reason. So two different messages, but they could all live under the same umbrella. And so the task.
I guess
is
that's what I was a little confused about, because to me, those are really different messaging.
Yes.
One doesn't affect water supply, the other one does.
Right. Having this where from the beginning and having these groups is going in where we could have one-to-one communication. And so you would, potentially see only one batch of the information that's all about the things that are most important to you. You don't want to contradict each other, but it's more about appreciate the water that you do have.
Fascinating. Mad Men meets Texas Water. You guys using algorithms, you're looking at what will shake the consciousness of people in Texas.
Yes, sir.
And understanding that the transformation is going to take a long period of time, like it did in recycling. Took 30 years for the young folks started asking the parents about why we're throwing that in the trash. It's filling our landfills, and now everywhere you go, there's recycling bins in this building and in everybody's homes and the balance of it. And hopefully some of the messaging that y'all are trying to articulate will do the same thing. The young folks will ask, why do we have water on our turf right now?
Yeah.
Didn't it rain a week ago? Don't we? All of that stuff. So appreciate y'all's innovative thoughts very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
And Kyle, you had a question?
Real quick, while I got you. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We need to do so much more. Only question I have, why the non-GMO correlation? Water's
I think that's on me, just putting examples of different stamps. And that was really the only intention of those stamps down there, was different kinds of stamps that, there's a heart check mark on some things, there's a non-GMO, and there's different people that care about different things. And I think being certified and knowing that the product you're buying is being responsibly sourced, or they're using water responsibly, might influence purchase, which or affiliation with that brand.
I think
And so those are just literally examples.
okay.
Yeah.
He likes symmetry, and there was two blue things on the left, and he wanted two red things on the right. So
I think that's the only reason.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we can understand that. We're all Aggies. When you explain that to us, you had to balance the red and the blue.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you, Rye. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it
Thank you.
very much. Chair recognizes Linda Christie, Parent Regional Water District.
There you go.
First, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for asking me to talk about Interim Charge 5 regarding the broad-based conservation campaign for the state of Texas. I am Linda Christie, Government Affairs Director of the Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD is a wholesale water supplier serving over 2.1 million people in its 11-county service area. However, the majority of that water is used by our customer cities located in the western half of the Metroplex. I'd like to say it certainly makes sense to adopt a statewide campaign based on the tremendous success of the Don't Mess with Texas litter campaign. The success of that campaign is based on the fact that litter in Idalou is the same as litter in Kerrville. It's a message that works well for everyone. However, water is a little more complex. As you are well aware, there are many different providers of water in different geographical areas with many different types of water. Surface, groundwater, desal, etc. And there are many different media markets. In DFW alone, there are 3 major raw water suppliers, each serving different communities within their service area and each developing their own respective supplies. As an example, you might recall there was a water supply crisis for the North Texas Municipal Water District when the Army Corps of Engineers cut off their access to Lake Lavon. TRWD in Dallas did not have the same crisis impact our respective supplies. With only one major media market in DFW, conflicting messages were being sent to all of the residents. The communities served by North Texas Municipal Water District were told to immediately implement extreme water conservation measures,
while we were telling our residents, continue to use water efficiently, but there was no need for our crisis messaging and extreme conservation measures. That was the source of the reluctance by TRWD and Dallas to use the current statewide campaign, Water IQ, Know Your Water. Because of the reservoir-specific messaging required for Water IQ, when North Texas Municipal Water District started using the Water IQ message, communities throughout the Metroplex thought that Lake Lavon was a sole source supply for the entire region. In 2009, TRWD and the City of Dallas decided to join together in a regional campaign. The benefits are shared creative costs and a much more robust media buy. And we've learned some lessons over those past 9 years. First lesson learned, our citizens prefer a lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek message. Our goal is to impress upon residents the value and preciousness of water with a little bit of humor. And I'd like to say our various campaigns over the year have hit that mark. Our campaigns have ranged from water is beautiful, sorry, I just went blank.
Very moment, it's okay.
No, it's so sad. I can't believe I forgot this. We've had the Lawn Whisperer, Save Water, Save Tarrant Water, Save Dallas Water. You can't live without it. I don't know why that escaped me. The Lawn Whisperer, and our current campaign is water is awesome, use it, enjoy it, just don't waste it. Second lesson, threatening or scare tactics result in a negative reaction, causing some resentment and refusal to adopt the recommended water efficiency measures. And thirdly, we have concerns over a campaign that promotes a drought message. TRWD and Dallas have learned that a year-round consistent message has caused our residents to adopt water savings measures. A drought message doesn't convey the need to save water during times of rain like we are currently experiencing, and can sometimes damage our credibility with our customer cities. By learning to save water even when it's raining, it means our lakes are fuller, longer, and better equipped to handle the next dry spell or drought. The messaging we have done is successful.
Can I just
Yeah,
interrupt you for a
James.
second? Whose job do you think it should be primarily to put this message out? Should it be the state, or do you think it's better suited for the regional
Well, I'm going to go
groups?
into that.
Or-
Good
I'll
question. So,
back up then.
back up. We have seen a 38% reduction in our demand due to water conservation. And
How big
because
a reduction?
38% reduction in demands. And because of that, we're able to postpone segments of the $2.3 billion integrated pipeline because we don't need to connect to existing supplies we have because the demands aren't necessary for that connection in the near future. Reducing debt before the issuance is a huge benefit to our customer cities because they pay the cost for construction. And by not connecting those supplies, we're able to allow a period of delay before the next installment or tranche of debt is required, and it allows our customer cities to pay off existing debt and thereby stabilize their water rates. We believe that a message that values Texas water can work well in either small towns or large cities and cause positive change in the efficient use of water, thereby benefiting the entire state. We see a tremendous value in a statewide umbrella message with local control and flexibility to work with available water resources and respective media markets. There needs to be something that allows the small provider to get a media message, whether it's a video or printed something that's out of the box that they won't have the money or the resources to create, but it also allows the larger providers to tailor and have the message fit our media markets. We also believe that the message needs to be carefully considered and should shy away from shock value. Both conservation staff of TRWD and the City of Dallas have met with Michael and Rye. We find them very creative and very talented. We're just somewhat concerned that we see them limited to a message that gets some attention by uncertainty or fear. We think saying Texas will go dry sends a fearful message. And I was also asked to speak about school-based education. I want to highlight the success of our partner, Dallas Water Utilities. They have an education program for Dallas school children that they started in 2006 through a partnership with the University of North Texas. From 2006 to 2017, The program has provided 5,500 presentations for 470 schools. More than 145,000 students and 12,000 teachers have participated in the hands-on TEKS-aligned water education program, and they serve children from kindergarten to high school, and I'll just briefly say what they are. From kindergarten to fifth grade, that's when they receive the hands-on TEKS-aligned lessons, and they're presented by certified teachers from UNT. In middle school, almost 50,000 students have seen and interacted with exhibit modules that serve as a museum on wheels in over 500 presentations in over 70 middle schools. And in high school, more than 300 high school students have participated in the Summer Water Conservation Research Internship Program, and they have really gained knowledge from that. Dallas estimates the program to have saved 22 billion gallons of water. I appreciate your time and would try to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Hey, the issue on the lawn whisperer, I came up and met with y'all at Tarrant Regional about that, and it was, and probably not everybody's informed about that campaign. It basically tried to affect policies that the local governments as far as watering turf. And it was not just Fort Worth, but it was all the jurisdictions. All of them are contemplating going to once a week watering.
Twice a week water. Yeah, North Texas was the only once per week, and that was during the crisis. You know, we really feel in North Texas that the message that we need to hear the most is don't water outside so much. People waste water on their lawn. So we know through plumbing codes and fixtures that are being built, there's going to be in-house conservation measures taken passively, right? Because they're just going to have the differences made. But we will continue to see big yards in North Texas, and we're trying to really teach them how to water more efficiently. And that is the current campaign that we're currently doing. And when they were talking about getting on the weather reports, our plan is we have the entire region working on these information-based, how much to water in each area, because if it's raining in South Fort Worth, it may not be raining in Frisco. And so there needs to be something that tells each of these different areas how to adjust their timers outside to water appropriately, because everybody overwaters. And that's really how we got our 38% reduction in demand, is because we focused on the outdoor watering message. And that varies across the state. Some, don't have those types of issues.
So the water whisperer.
The lawn whisperer.
The lawn whisperer. They had an Indiana Jones character that would come on TV, and basically the messaging was brown is the new green.
Well, we weren't quite that
brown
extreme.
is cool, green is not cool to have your yard. You look at your neighbor's yard and it's lush and green. You're going, God, it arrogant. Why is he taking all our water? And so everything sort of transformed. Everybody was like cool with having a yellow, brown lawn.
We wanted them green. We were just teaching them that they don't need as much water to make it green as they think they do.
Well, his message was brown is cool,
well,
not having the green.
Yeah.
And you had a number of cities that basically adopted policies to twice a week watering.
That's correct.
Which was, and it was a $2 million campaign. I think that was the dollar amount.
Well, we by sharing with Dallas, spend about $1 million each for each of our campaigns. We continue to do so.
So the cost of those campaigns, $2 million for that. The other campaigns, let's just say all three of them were $2 million apiece. That's $6 million, and you saved $1 billion worth of infrastructure that you had to build.
Exactly.
I mean, so you look at the multiplier on that. As we get out and we pursue these aggressive awareness campaigns, it's going to save money, for folks. It's just that short-term hit, especially when the cities have the departments embedded in their structure, and they start this advocacy for reducing the amount of water. Well, it hits their bottom line.
Absolutely, it does.
There's a 20-30% decrease in water being consumed. That's a 20 to 30% decrease in the revenue they're receiving off of. If they can absorb that first shot, first couple of years, then we're good. But it's, that's there's communities that I've visited with across the state that are saying, we just can't afford it. And we can't afford the bottom line, so we got to get over that.
Well, I think by explaining to our customer cities, you can either have savings in water, or we can build a couple of more of these $2.3 billion projects, which you have to pay for the cost outweighs the savings they can find later. I mean, so they have to start adjusting their budgets and how they do things in their water departments. And it's a, like turning the Queen Mary sometimes. It takes a long time for those who have been employed there a long time to see how to do that. But it gets there, they get there.
Yeah, James.
Linda, you were very tactful in the way you said it, but if I was translating, you're fine having some information out there, but you don't want it forced upon everyone.
Well, what we would love to have is an umbrella message that is broad enough that it can be used across the state, and it reinforces, no matter where you're traveling, because we all love to travel in Texas, the same type, broad message umbrella.
Yep.
And then have, if the state needs to have some money in there to do some creative work that smaller cities and towns can use, that's, I think, appropriate, but it also needs to be a message that we can take back to DFW and create what we need from that with the overarching
Yeah, and
message.
really my concern is, and we talk about it all the time, but the responsibility is on the locals, not on the state, to provide water. And so for us to get overly involved in messaging from here, when the reality is the message needs to be different sometimes based on, where your water stands.
Exactly.
How much water you have and
Right.
so I think most of this, while an umbrella may be great, most of the messaging needs to remain, in my opinion, local.
That was our consideration when we said, consider this carefully,
Yeah,
and there are probably good
I was
solutions.
just making sure I heard it the same way. And
Thank you.
You have anything? Linda, outstanding.
Well,
I
thank you very
appreciate
much.
the-
Thank you for your
Appreciate you
time.
showed the outcome. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Chair recognizes Dana Nichols with Sauls. Dana, just state your name and the organization.
Dana Nichols with Manager of Conservation Department, San Antonio Water System.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me here today. Actually, a lot of what I'm going to talk about, we are a retail operation, so we kind of are right at our customers all the time. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs we've done, but it really meshes well with this idea of both that Linda had and that the others had, Michael and others, that they're looking at really drilling down into what people need. We have broad messages, but then we have some more drilling to do.
Yeah.
So how do I forward the? Oh, forward.
Yeah, just cue. Yeah.
Just so you know, okay. So what we have in San Antonio, we've been doing conservation for 25 years, and we do it day in and day out, all the time. From the very beginning, we considered conservation as water supply. In fact, the Conservation Department was not in the Public Relations Department, it was in the Water Supply Department. And so from the very beginning, we considered it a water supply. We believe it also requires continuous analysis and evaluation and change to to whatever is currently going on and how people are responding to messages. Next, please. Well, so they're not coming out, but this is our water demand has decreased by, well, that's odd. Do you want to punch that again? And again, okay. Our water demand has decreased by 50% over the last 40 years. And what that means is basically conservation is our largest supply of water, period. In order to meet that demand, if we use the same amount of water in 1982, if every person did in San Antonio, as in 2017, we would need 3 Vista Ridges to make that up. Next. And just punch it through. I guess it's, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had it on the little, back one. I just wanted to bring up, San Antonio Water System also has a wastewater department in our area. And when you save water, you save money on the wastewater side too. And a lot of water utilities only do water, and the treatment side is somewhere else completely. By our water conservation program, the amount of water that it saved, not only did it keep us from having to build a lot more water supply, but it also kept us from having to build millions of dollars worth of additional treatment for wastewater. Next. We have a community-wide messaging. So we do these wider messaging, and we do that for programs that are relevant to all customers, or mostly all of our customers. So we have our landscape coupon programs. The landscape coupon program is basically a program to remove turf and irrigation 200 square feet at a time. Linda's right. We are right now, the plumbing codes have taken care of pretty much the indoor water conservation when it comes to municipal water use. It's kind of all about outdoor at this point. But we've also found that it's really hard to garden. It's really hard to do that. So we help people wherever we can. So we have landscape coupons. We have gardenstylesa.com, which is a complete website that you can go to, and you can also get our newsletter. And then, of course, when we do watering rules, we have year-round watering rules, time of day watering rules, and then, of course, when we go into drought, we have different watering rules there. And we use traditional messaging and broad messaging. So that, I think, kind of maybe goes with this Texas-wide broad messaging that you're talking about. These are our new truck wraps that are going to be coming out this year. Next. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of unintended consequences. For a long time, the San Antonio water system was kind of well known among other water conservation departments as someone that didn't do rain barrels. And it was kind of, why don't you do rain barrels? You do everything else but rain barrels. Well, finally we said, okay, we'll do it and we give in. And so last January, what we did was give out, I think it was a world record, but we didn't submit it, 6,000 rain barrels in one day. People had to buy them. They were $27, but they were heavily subsidized by us. It was for anybody that was a SAWS water customer, residential water customer, and you could get up to 2 each. It would be $27. Well, they came, they got them, they loved us. It was very well run. The people that came, 3,200 people came, got about 6,000 rain barrels. And then we let that was in January. It was a day like today, except it was January, when it's supposed to be like today in January. And we let it ride. And then we went back after the summer of last year and analyzed the program. Now, we always kind of felt that that rain barrels maybe weren't the way to go for conserving water, but we thought maybe it would be a lost leader at the very least, right? That, okay, you get your rain barrel, and now you're going to get into conservation, and you're going to do some more things with conservation. So we analyzed our recipients of the rain barrels, and what we found was they were actually less likely to do additional conservation as anybody else in San Antonio water system market. They actually used 4% more water than everybody else in the market. And at the same time, we actually sent out a survey to everybody that got all 3,200 people that got the rain barrels. 1,100 responded. And this is very interesting. I don't know if the guys would like this information, but within the people that got rain barrels, 34% of them reduced their water. However, when we asked the question, do you think you saved water, 91% thought they saved water, even though they did not. So there's this kind of a grumbling, there's this idea. So these are some unintended consequences. Next slide, please. So, okay, we got the rain barrels out there. Kind of once you get them out there, you can't really take them away. It's hard to take them away. So what we did was we just kind of switched the model. And instead of assuming that they were going to go get more conservation information for themselves once they got the rain barrel, what we said was you have to sign up for our Water Saver Rewards program. We have a Water Saver Rewards program. Kind of works like any other rewards program, except the way you earn points in San Antonio is you go to different partner events that earn points. You can check our gardenstylesa.com event calendar. There's events every day. It's amazing how many events there are in San Antonio that you can get rewards for. When you get 3 rewards, you will automatically receive by email your email rain barrel $30 coupon. And so at least you've gotten a little conservation information before you get your rain barrel. So that's how, and then as the program goes on, when you get 5 points, you get a $50 mulch coupon, and when you get 7 points, you get a $70 coupon. That's the best one, because you can take it to any of our nurseries that are participating, and they can buy anything with it except pesticides, fertilizers, and rock. Next. We are moving more towards targeted messaging, more and more, and it's based on relevance to the individual. So, for instance, we have an irrigation design rebate. The irrigation design rebate, we basically pay you cash. This isn't a credit off your water bill. We give you a check. We give you cash if you reduce or remove your irrigation system, and it can be up to $5,000. It's becoming very popular. We don't care what you do with the cash. You can do whatever you want to with it, with that cash. We are doing even more direct targeting. So we have it where the irrigation design rebate is obviously only for people with irrigation systems, right? Because if you don't have an irrigation system, you can't remove anything. The other program that was on the previous slide talked about Plumbers to People, and that was for an uplift, and those are for our seniors and our low-income customers, homeowners, where we help them fix leaks. And so we targeted those that way. And it was still general, but this one, we actually dig and we find you and we send an individual message. So we did a direct mail based on customer use. And what we did was look at people that used over 15,000 gallons a month in the summer average, and they used that same amount in the winter, so they didn't reduce their winter use. And we sent a mailer, 2,800 people fell in that. We sent a mailer to them. We told them exactly how much water they use. And we said, you might want to reduce your water in the winter. And we also offered them one of our consults. So we do irrigation consults. They're 1-hour consults. They're very popular. We were booked 6 weeks out this summer, and they save a ton of water. People that got the consults, about 7% of the people took us up on the consults. And people that got the consults used 53% less water in the winter the following year and 18% less in the summer. But just by getting a piece of something in the mail from SAWS saying this is your exact use, reduce your water, we got a 28% reduction from those people. All we did was send them a letter. We didn't talk, they didn't call us, anything else. So we're going more and more towards really mining the data that we have at SAWS and targeting those customers with the messages that we think work best. And we seem to be getting good results. And we're going to do this actually again this year. Next. And of course we have our great communications department, has a whole social media team. We're on all the channels. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on everything. They do water conservation, of course. They also do things like Med Drop, which is water quality related. And it's even, you know, the best visual that the local TV loves is when you have a major main break and you got the water shooting up, and they love that. So we also put that out. We actually kind of had fun with that one. You know, it's not fun. And no one lost water, by the way. No one lost water service as a result of that. That was the day that Manu Ginobili with the Spurs actually announced that he was going to retire. And so our social media people had fun putting little crying emojis on it, because we figured that really it was just tears for Manu Ginobili. So people had fun with that. Next.
That's good.
I too was asked to talk a little bit about our education program. Our education program is award-winning and has been going on for 20 years, and there's not enough time to talk about it. But I did want to say a couple of things. I wanted to draw your attention to their mission. It's to affect change in the community by developing a water-literate citizenry. And they really, really take that to heart when they do that. They've been doing this for 20 years. Next slide. And they do everything. Just like we have a conservation program for everybody, they have an education program for everybody. Of course, all of their K through 12 is standardized. They also, the impact teachers are for, it's actually kind of a leadership program for teachers. It's not, oh, we're going to teach the teachers to teach the curriculum we want in the classroom. It's actually a program to give teachers some extra confidence and leadership skills on their own. And of course, we do the community. If anybody hasn't been on the Rain to Drain tour that they do in San Antonio, come on down and try to get on it. It fills up fast. Everything fills up like the day it's offered. But next. So we're moving to targeted messages. We think they need to be more relevant. I couldn't believe this. The average American is presented 4,000, 10,000 messages a day. Hard to cut through the chatter. Next. Regarding the statewide messaging, in San Antonio, I mean, like I said, we've been doing conservation for 20 years, 25 years, and I think we've been very successful at it. And we've never made it like a deprivation. We've never thought of it as depriving you of something. Conserving water isn't depriving you of anything, and we've never made any messages like that. We make them full of hope and different things to do, and we make it cool, and it's trendy, and it's what everybody's doing, and that I think is something that you can go to the next one, and that is something that really I think is important if we're doing a statewide messaging. And just go to the next slide real quick. And I think it needs to be a little more inspiring to all of Texas.
Or perspiring, yeah.
Or
Either one,
perspiring, yeah. Not today though. It's
Yeah,
freezing in
it's
here.
true.
But I think a little more of an inspiring message. Water and actually water conservation and water quality do go together. We work with the San Antonio River Authority on their rain garden type activity that helps with that, and that also helps with water conservation because you don't have to water that lawn. So they actually do go together, those two, if they're done right. So I guess I would be with Linda a little bit, I think, and I think I would be a little concerned if messagings were so detailed that they conflicted with local messages, particularly in very larger markets, in the larger cities that do have the resources and for the messaging. I think a broad kind of don't mess with Texas style messaging would be good. I'm not sure the one they've got going now quite does that, but I think the idea of having messages that you can then go and target, like they were saying, is a good idea, and it's something that we're doing. And that's all I have. Is there anything else?
Anybody have any questions for Dana? Obviously, San Antonio has the notoriety for saving water for the last 2 decades. They've sort of been the leader in that just because of the fact that we were running out of water. We're curtailed in how much water we could access through the Edwards for building water supplies. So I think, the messaging has been consistent, and I've seen it. If there's any way you could offer coupons to Whataburger or Buc-ee's, I think we might get, if we could bring that into water.
We can find a way they can save water. We work with Whataburger
Yeah.
a lot on trying to get this. Yeah.
But thank you
They're
very
actually
much,
partners.
Dana. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. The last witness is Maurice McDermott. Maurice, if you'd come up. Just state your name and the organization you represent, Maurice, if you would.
Thank you very much, Chair Larson, for inviting us and the committee. We're so happy to be here. My name is Maurice McDermott. I'm President and CEO of the Whitty Museum. And to my right is Dr. Heather Shipley, who is the Vice Provost and the Dean of Engineering for University of Texas at San Antonio. And she'll just talk very briefly about the partnership at the end of this presentation. And the reason we're here today, in the spirit of Texas-wide efforts on water education, is the Center for the Future of Water at the Whitty Museum. And we shared that with Representative Larson, and so here we're going to share it with you today. So the first thing I want to say is that the goal to build a center where ongoing dialogue and interactive experiences bring nature, science, and culture to bear on the future of water and inspire and enlighten citizenry. And this has been going on for over 10 years at the Whitty, this effort, and including our K through 12 education programs. We have worked with Dana Nichols actually at SAWS for all those many years, and our university partners, and have even had a prototype for the center to make sure that this was the right way to go. And we had over 100,000 people in 11 weeks. So we know that people are searching for what is the story about water. They're worried. So our guiding questions, the next slide, which is what do you know about water? Is there one more slide after that? What can you do to shape the future of water? And how will we regenerate and sustain a healthy ecosystem? So what we've learned at the Whitty Museum over many years, and we're a very data-driven museum, and we're statewide, and we can talk about that in a minute. Actually, why don't we go to the next slide, and then I'll explain this. Can we go? So why the Whitty? The Whitty, we've just done a $100 million transformation of the museum to expand it. And since then, we've had 700,000 visitors. You can see 230,000 school-aged children. And 135 during weekly free Tuesdays. We have 220 Texas counties in all 50 states, and it's predominantly Latino, et cetera. So in other words, we have the social equity locally and throughout the state to be a message bearer. We have had very high success on the other side of our campus. This is going to be on the northern side of our campus. On the southern side of our campus, we have the HEB Body Adventure, which medical professionals asked us to do years ago. We had about 100 partners, very similar to the university here, and we were asked to handle Health IQ. What do you know about your body? How do you empower? How do you make change? And how do you sustain wellness? And our focus was on the perfect storm of childhood obesity and sedentary lifestyle processed foods. So after 5 years of being that and doing a Power Pass technology, which this will have, I'll share about that in a minute, we are already seeing a dial change on childhood obesity and healthy. In fact, we just won a couple of weeks ago a national award from the Robert Wood Johnson's for this, one of the 4 healthiest cities in the United States. So we can, we are going to affect change, we believe, with this Center for the Future. The next slide shows our powerful partnerships. I do want to acknowledge the University of Texas at San Antonio. You're going to hear from Heather. They've already put about 30 of their outstanding professors behind this, but we have, beyond that, we've had everything you see today is the result of a series of steering committee meetings and charrettes, including Dr. Andy Sampson with the Meadows Foundation. So, this is a result of a consensus. Again, at the Whitney, we do work on the themes of land, sky, and water as a natural history museum with all TEKS-aligned curriculum like SAWS and so many other professionals. But again, we have the capacity to serve an even greater audience now with our transformation. Up to 800,000 a year statewide. So if we go to the next slide, and by the way, I didn't mention, we have 100% of school districts in San Antonio, and beyond that, we're increasing our school districts statewide. So building and site references, if you go on, we do have a global exhibition firm. Gallagher & Associates have done water exhibitions or in Israel, Singapore, throughout the world. This project will be a net zero building. It'll be a live creature building. Right here, you're looking at actually some architectural examples of the world. Lake Plato, our architects they're working internationally as well. They're a local firm, but they are also international. So it will be integrating the river. Also, can you go back one slide? Alive. Everything on the building will be as live as it can be in Texas. These are green because these are in wet environments. Ours will probably be brown. In fact, I love that. I love the brown as a new green. We're definitely going to adapt that. And then everything about the building will be, in this case, a timber frame. So it'll be completely, again, green. The building design, we're going to go real quickly into it. I know you have so little time left. First of all, if you go a couple more slides. Again, with our partners, we had 80 people at our last charrette, including Dr. Shipley. So is the beauty of water, how water shapes the land, the underground story, how water works, and then the outdoor-indoor labs and multi-use space for community gatherings. We can go next and see how dimensionally that works. The Whitney Museum is on the headwaters of the San Antonio River. The river literally comes out of the Edwards Aquifer right at our property. We also have a 1719 acequia madre built in the center of our property that the Spanish were very clever to recognize as what we call today, or Pape Dawson calls today, the split flow. Back then they knew how powerful it was. So that acequia actually fed the Alamo 2 miles south. So, and it's right, and we have dug it up and found it. So we're going to use that as a historic. The next one is a David Lake fabulous design of this creature that will be the center for the future of water. We're going to enter this into the Modern Museum of Art for architectural drawings. But in here you can see the bottom of the slide is Broadway, then the San Antonio River, and what is actually a WPA water channel. That water comes into the watershed from Fort Sam Houston. down the watershed into the San Antonio River. So all of this will be part of the messaging of how we experience water in an urban setting and what we can do to keep it, going. If you go to the next slide, you can kind of see our campus is pretty enormous now. It's 10 acres, and on the northern part of the property, which is the right part of your slide, is the future center, or rather the Center for the Future of Water. We'll go to the next slide, and you can see how this live building will sit in the tree canopy in the northern part of the campus, and that will incorporate the outside and inside of the water channel and the beautiful San Antonio River at the headwaters and the riparian habitat. If you've been to the Whitty Museum, and I hope you come visit us, it's actually the Bexar County River Habitat. Bexar County gave us $5 million to make sure that the bioswales, everything we do is cleanses the river. We can kind of flip through and you'll see that the outside, all the school children and the university students, and again, this will be a university student live lab, will be part of this riparian habitat, testing for water quality, and so on. We'll have a water quality monitoring station there as well. And those are the beauty shots, so we'll just keep going. Very quickly, in the beauty of water, what we found in our data, and particularly with the medical, but also with water, is that if you prescribe change, it doesn't work. Our doctors tell us all the time, we prescribe change take this pill for 30 days, within 10 days, nobody's taking your pills anymore. Well, it's a similar situation. That's just the human nature. And in our testing, we found that with water too when we had our prototype. So what we have put our stake in the ground as a museum, as an education facility, is to inspire change, to provide possibilities and experiences for change, immersive environments. And if you experience change, they're literally your synapses in your body change. So it's that behavioral. And so that's kind of what we as a museum are good at. And it's what we become good at over many years, particularly with immersive environments. So I'm going to go really through this because you have a packet, but this is our Gallagher Associates. And again, they've done water museums from Israel to Singapore and the United States. And by the way, nothing like this has ever been done in the world. So it will be a destination globally. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the exhibition, but I am going to say the first area is the inspiration of water. So this engages the visitor right away about, let's pay attention. I'm already interested in water. Now I'm even more interested. We're going to go to the next one, which is, and again, some wonderful beauty shots. How water shapes the land is the next slide. This is a really critical slide of the original shape. I think Mr. Frank mentioned, as we all know, that Texas is shaped by rivers and watersheds. Now we have many lakes and reservoirs, but that understanding of how the aquifer and the rivers work is essential. And in terms of water IQ, very few of our school children know about this, and we work on this mightily from West Texas to Piney Woods, Rio Grande to Panhandle. The next one, which is the water policies are integrated into every single gallery. We decided that at our last charrette. Where am I now? Yes, and this will be, if you go one more slide, please, or two, yeah. So this area, this gallery will be, again, immersive, but it will show the shaping of water through engineering and how that has an impact on the land, both underground and overground, but certainly in this gallery, how the reservoirs and rivers and engineered water changes the way we understand water. The next is the underground story, which is our aquifers. What we talked about is the aquifer under Dallas being a potential storage area. So everything from that, and of course the complicated nature of SAWS. I've seen Robert Puente, the CEO of SAWS, give many presentations on brackish water, on desalinization, on the exchange from the Trinity, the Wilcox, and the Edwards, and people are blank. They do not understand the enormous work that's being done underground. And the Whitty is the place. We are not specialists. We're generalists. We're experts in general language and experience. So that's our job, is to help the CEOs of water agencies and river agencies educate our general population, including, and in particular, our children, our school children. So we'll keep going to our And of course, this will also be, go to the next slide, and it'll be an immersive experience of, in this case, a karst aquifer, but we'll also, of course, share our sand aquifers and all the different aquifers and the exchange of water in the aquifers, which is quite extraordinary and unknown. And then finally, and most importantly, is how water works, which is the last, if you could keep going one more slide, which is how we experience water. So we have a TECEQ gave us an award for our one of our many programs, which is River to Sink, What's in Your Drink, where we do the whole water quality and what happens to water that comes out of your tap. And so if you go to the next couple of slides, you'll see one way we'll do this is to show there will be no inner walls. No drywall. It'll all be walls, so you'll see how water comes into the building and out of the building, even electricity, how electricity or all of the energy intersects. That it'll be a net zero building, but you'll actually see the building work. During rainstorms, the water will come through the walls. There'll be an immersion experience. So if you can see one more slide. Gallagher has actually done this. In Los Angeles and California, and it's worked really well. People just, they're empowered to understand what they can do in the home and outside their home because they see it. And then the last is the water lab and classroom. And again, our curriculum is hands-on. We have students in a way that teachers can't because we've got on-site labs and outside and inside experiences. So our teachers rely on the Whitty Museum to provide immersive and ignite the imagination. The very last slide, those are our labs, actually, some of them, that we already have labs throughout the new Whitty. And if you go to the very last slide, you can see this is not an inexpensive project. It will be between 30 and 35 million. But I have to tell you, our water agencies, our wonderful partners, they already came to us to provide funding for design. We did not even ask for the design money. They came to us. So I think that this is something that people are thirsty for, and we're really excited to have been chosen to be able to be the place to have a center for the future of water, particularly in Texas. But I want to yield the floor to Heather to talk about UTSA's stake in the ground.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. Just briefly to talk about our partnership with the Whitty. So at the University of Texas San Antonio, we've been collaborating and having ongoing dialogue about how we can have interactive experiences that bring nature, science, and culture to bear within this exhibit. And so what we've done is we've focused the faculty and their research areas and their specialties around those 5 exhibit areas that that we talked about. And so we have anyone from social science to engineering to biology to chemistry to public policy to architecture. And so we've grouped those together so that we can provide expertise and have a partnership both with learning environments and within the exhibit itself.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? I mean, I'm excited just because we really don't have a museum that's focused solely on water. We've got El Paso, they've got a learning center. Sauls is, y'all put together, some exercises where students come through, see the facilities. I think that's repeated all over the state. But this will be sort of like a Guggenheim. They'll be committed to just explaining water in Texas. So I think it'll educate a lot of folks, both at the elementary school level, but also adults about how it all works. And I think it has a place. So thank y'all very much for coming up.
Oh, thank you.
That concludes that charge. We'll go to our last charge, and the chair recognizes John Dubnik with the Texas Water Development Board. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman
Appreciate all
Larson.
the floods you've created all over the state.
Yeah, if it is ironic that we're getting this kind of rainfall on the day we're talking about the flood assessment.
assessments, yeah.
It's certainly topical and appropriate. But Chairman Larson, members of the committee, my name is John Dubnik. I'm with the Texas Water Development Board, and I am here to provide a brief overview of the draft state flood assessment. Flooding is a big problem in the state. That goes without saying, and it's especially apparent on a day like this. And so to really understand the full impact of flooding and how it affects our state, the legislature, provided appropriations to our agency for this current biennium to support our technical programs, help develop our evolving flood science programs, but also to provide a broad overview or assessment of the current state and landscape of flood management activities in Texas. And so the product of all that is this very first draft state flood assessment. So I'll give you a quick overview of the draft so far. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so it's important when we're talking about the flood assessment to understand the scope of what we took on and the key objectives of this assessment. We really had three key objectives. One, we wanted to assess the risk, roles, and responsibilities of all the various entities, particularly what would be the most appropriate role of the state of Texas in being involved in flood management activities. We also wanted to provide a overview and an estimate of the flood mitigation costs, a really high-level estimate of flood mitigation costs for the state. And also, we wanted to provide a synopsis of the stakeholders' view of what the future of flood planning in the state of Texas would look like. So this assessment was really built on information provided by the folks that do this every day. We really relied heavily on stakeholder input as the foundation for the information provided in the assessment. And we reached out through a couple of means here, surveys and workshops, to talk to the floodplain administrators, the local officials, those that actually do this, and solicit their input. And through the survey, we got over 1,000 responses. 300 plus of those were floodplain administrators. That was the first survey. The second survey was more targeted, and we asked those that responded to the first survey to provide some more specific information, namely relative to cost of their mitigation strategies. So that was helpful in developing our cost estimates. We also went on a listening tour of the state. We conducted workshops in 8 locations in the various major basins. We sat down, we asked some prompting questions, and really we just had face-to-face conversations. We listened to what they believed the priorities of the state would be and what their needs were. Next slide. So one of the questions that we posed to them, we asked them very specifically in terms of what the state's role would be, was how should the state best direct our resources? And so we compiled all their information, and they really identified the 3 top requests in terms of where the resources should be dedicated. So number 1 priority, according to the stakeholders, was to provide financial assistance to implement flood mitigation activities. So that's the actual implementation of the projects. Their second highest priority was to improve flood risk mapping and modeling. And the third highest priority, in accordance with the stakeholders, was to provide financial assistance for flood mitigation planning. Next slide, please. So our agency, we looked at all this input and these objectives, and we agree there's a logic to dedicating resources to these things. We just arranged them into a sequence that made sense to us. So if you follow the logic, I'm sorry, back up one. So if you follow the logic that the data that we collect supports the technical efforts that are needed to develop the models that produces the maps, that's a core function and really a key first step that then could support some sort of collaborative planning process. And that collaborative planning process could be the means of identifying what mitigation strategies make sense. So we identify these as the 3 pillars of flood management. It really makes sense to look at these things in this way. And it's also consistent with what the stakeholders identified as our priorities. Next slide, please. So the first pillar is mapping. And flood hazard maps are really a critical tool for managing flood activities. They're critical in identifying where the flood-prone areas are, where to dedicate your resources, and where to implement the strategies. And also, they're very important in conveying the risk of flood and how to delineate these high-risk floodplains. So again, this was the stakeholders' second highest priority. They did see that this was an important function. Currently, the flood hazard maps, the key version of these are the Federal Emergency Management Agency's firms or flood insurance rate maps. All the NFIP or National Flood Insurance Program participating communities are required to regulate in accordance to these firms. So this really is the standard by which most of the communities convey flood risk. But there are some drawbacks to these firms. One, they are very limited in application. And so You have to recognize these maps were designed for insurance purposes. They're regulatory maps. And also they're static. As soon as they're produced, they no longer reflect how the watershed changes and how development affects these watersheds. And also in terms of limited application, they really only look at coastal and riverine flooding. And those are major problems in the state. But stakeholders indicated to us that another major problem was more local flooding, stormwater flooding or urban flooding, and the firms really don't represent that. Another thing we heard back from the stakeholders is that development of the firms is a very time-consuming process. FEMA requires a 4-phase process to go from start to finish to develop an adopted firm. And some of the feedback we heard from the stakeholders is that in many cases, the pace or the rate of development outpaced the rate of the development of these maps. And so in many cases, particularly in areas where there's a lot of development, these maps were, because of the rate of how they were developed, could become outdated. And in terms of the status of the firms in the state of Texas, this map here shows you really what's available currently, and it really does reflect that many of these maps are outdated. The hatched area to the north and the west of the state, this really reflects counties where there's either no maps or just partial or paper maps. So again, likely based on some outdated information. And then the blue areas are the areas that actually have digital firms. But the large majority of these are older than 5 years old, and so in some areas they could use some attention. Nevertheless, these are the primary means of conveying risk, and many of the communities rely on these maps to help drive and guide how they manage flood. And so we took a look at what the overall cost to the state it would take to map the entire state and actually update these maps. And that cost estimate came in at about $604 million. Next slide, please. So again, in reference to how these things change, now it's important to update these maps. Atlas 14, Volume 11, you've probably heard of it as a compilation of maximum rainfall events, and namely the 100-year, 24-hour precipitation event. This map represents the latest figures based on 40 to 50 years of precipitation data, and you can see already that there are some areas of the state, particularly the hill country around Austin and Houston, where that new precipitation event and that standard is going to increase by as much as 3 to 5 inches. And so that's going to definitely require some new analysis and some updating of the current high-risk floodplains. Next. So the second pillar on the 3 pillars of flood management is planning. And it's safe to say there's not really a version of comprehensive state planning ongoing currently in the state, but there is planning happening at various scales. At the state scale, Division of Emergency Management, TDEM, they actually produce a Texas Hazardous Mitigation Plan. They do this every 5 years. This sort of is a high-level look at weather-related hazards and strategies to address those hazards. It does address flooding, but it also addresses other things like wildfires and tornadoes. It's not necessarily a comprehensive flood plan. At the watershed scale, San Antonio River Authority, I think, is a good example of watershed scale planning, and they're currently very active with their local entities to facilitate modeling, mapping, and mitigation efforts for flooding in that basin. Then at the local scale, our own agency has a grant program, the Flood Protection Grant Program, where we've facilitated planning at the community scale by providing funding to assist them at the local level in those planning efforts. Next slide. So again, planning, this was the stakeholders' third highest priority. I already mentioned there's not really a statewide version or comprehensive version of flood planning. When we asked the stakeholders what they believed the future of flood planning should look like in Texas, they showed a strong preference for watershed scale planning. And this map on the right shows you what that might look like. It shows you 12 major river basins. They also provide some value input into what that process might look like or what some of the objectives might be. So the stakeholders indicated that through this planning process, it would be important to identify and prioritize projects, much like the state water plan. Also, it was important to assess upstream and downstream impacts, because within the watersheds, those development within the same watershed can affect other areas. And they also felt important to develop consistent policies and guidelines such that everybody was following the same sort of standard, that was some sort of consistency across the board. And then finally, they felt like that these groups could evaluate future scenarios so they can acknowledge that things change, populations change, the watershed changes, development changes the hydrology of the basin. So that would be part of this scenario analysis. Next slide. So the third pillar was the mitigation. And so if you recall, this was the stakeholders' top priority in terms of where they felt like the state should invest our resources. And so when we talk about mitigation, we're really talking about activities that reduce the severity of flood impacts. And there's various versions of that. The main categories of mitigation are structural and non-structural. Your typical structural mitigation are really barriers to water, dams, levees, sort of hard gray infrastructure, detention ponds, those kind of things. On the non-structural side, those are really activities such as outreach programs, enforcement ordinances, early warning, flood warning systems, those type of things. What you find is communities typically employ a hybrid of all of these things. And so one of the goals of the assessment is when we looked at our survey, our respondents to the surveys, and we asked them, what are your needs? And we asked them to provide information such that we could accomplish that goal of the assessment and provide a really general estimate as to the cost of mitigation for the entire state. So it was a 10-year outlook, relied heavily on the survey respondents, and the survey respondents represented about 60% of the population. So we had to use some statistical magic to be able to estimate that remaining 40%. And as a result, we're representing these figures as ranges because they are 40% of it is a statistical estimate. It's important to understand what we did not include. We did not look at the cost of recovery, disaster recovery, for example, to replace damaged structures from some of the storm damage from Harvey, for example. Those were, we did not consider those costs. We also didn't consider some of the really large-scale projects, for example, the coastal spine or the Ike Dike. There's talk of those sort of things, but those weren't included. Or high-hazard dam repair. Those costs were not included in these estimates. So, next slide. The results. The cost for mitigation for the entire state, we wanted to look at this by a simple formula, ultimately to get to what we call a flood funding shortfall. But we estimated based on the survey data and the analysis, the total mitigation cost for the state will range between $31.5 and $36 billion. And once we've considered our estimates of local funds and also non-local funds, the total statewide funding shortfall we estimate to be between 18 and 26 billion. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, I just provided a very high level overview of a very dense document with a lot of information. Next steps for this document is we're working through comments that we received during the comment period that ended on October 3rd. We're going to incorporate any appropriate edits as a result of those comments and present to our board in December for possible adoption. And then we intend it to have to you all, so you'll have information going into the next legislative session. So that's a lot of information, and then it's a lot more in the document. That concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
I don't even have to look at him, Chairman Ashby.
Yes, sir.
Well, I really didn't. Sorry. I really didn't have a question, but since I was recognized, I make a comment or two. I'm really pleased to see the work that y'all have put into this. I mean, after Ike and Rita and Harvey, I mean, it's clear that we've got to, we need to learn from our lessons here in the recent past and history tells us. And I think certainly moving towards this state flood assessment that y'all been working on is good, and it's probably a little overdue, but I'm glad we're moving in that direction. I just comment for all of my colleagues here, and something I think we talk a lot about budgetary issues, big ones that we're going to be facing over the next few biennia in Texas, and I think this is one that we're going to have to add to the list. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how much longer we can afford not to take action on step one, which of course is the mapping, and just to use your number, $604 million. That's a lot of money, and but then again, we've got to get started, and so I think that it's good we're having this discussion. I'm pleased we're looking at this interim charge. I think that, the legislature is going to need to recognize that this is probably something that we need to move on sooner rather than later. But again, total price tag, we're probably talking close to $30 billion in terms of state dollars. That's not to mention the local funds that you talked about, which were again significant. So, I just think that it's something that we need to make a note of here, that this is going to be a big budgetary driver. It's not something we're going to need to accomplish all in one session, but certainly we need to start. And I'd love to, hope the legislature maybe could start moving in the direction that you're talking about next session. So kudos on the work that you guys have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, John, thank you. This is going to be one of our biggest challenges, I think, as a state we've had in decades to reconcile it. It creates this economic hardship. When you look at this Atlas 14 map, and it's showing the propensity for future rainfall episodes, and this is using science that's being deployed all over the country. We have that area between Beaumont and Houston that's flooded 3 times in the last 2 years, 100 to 500 year flood episodes. That's going to continue. That's also where all of our petrochemical refineries, or a lion's share of it is, and we had 4 feet of water after the Harvey episode, and there's been subsequent flooding of infrastructure over there that hurts our economy if we don't create some kind of strategy to mitigate the flooding. So it's not just a convenience issue, it's a big loss of life issue that we've experienced as a state, and the property inundation. So I agree with Trent. What he's saying is we got to make the commitment, and this is a long-term strategy, that $604 million to start the mapping, and behind it comes a lot larger numbers. And if we can coalesce with the local governments, the river authorities, the federal folks, and try to put pots of money in these areas that have a high proclivity of flooding, that we go in and we start reconciling them instead of just deferring them like they've been deferred for the last 3 decades. And so this is a good start. So we really appreciate that. And this map right here, if it's accurate, then the flooding that we're experiencing in the Llano today and in the Colorado, and we've got houses and boat docks going over the dam at LBJ as we speak, then this is going to be continued for the next several decades if Atlas 14 is correct. So I think we need to prepare around the science of this. Thank you. Appreciate that. That's going to end the testimony. We have 1 witness that signed up in public testimony. If you want to speak, please get a witness affirmation form and fill it out. Joe Carr Tedder. Joe, why don't you get Joe Carr come up?
Do you have the copies of the presentation? I ran off copies because I'm going to refer to some graphs that I thought might be helpful for you to see. My name is Joe Carr Tedder. I'm the founder and president of Central Texas Water Coalition. I formed the organization in 2011 because I felt like people in Central Texas, where we're now grown to 2 million people, did not have a unified voice to talk about what's happening with water. Thank you, committee, for showing the leadership in coming around the state and having these meetings this way, as opposed to everybody always going to Austin. I didn't appreciate you last night when I was driving in the rain from Lake Buchanan, but I think is really helpful. And it also shows that you're showing the leadership that's so desperately needed in the state where water is concerned. And I think that's always been one of the big problems. Our issue is conservation and elevating efficiency. And a lot of our water policies are operating as though there's still plenty of water. And I think the science and the data shows you that that is not the case. There was a session in New Mexico going on concurrently with this event, or I would have been there. And their topic was the tipping point, water scarcity and policies. And I think that is what you as a committee are looking at. And I really do appreciate that. We try to think out of the box. Our issues are local. I appreciated very much the comments from the speakers earlier, talking about not putting science in a black box and the need for transparency and the need for people to be involved and move forward. So we tried to think out of the box on this water marketing, and we came up with a concept of a bidding process for interruptible water. And I'll walk you through why we're looking at that. The first one in our basin, billing rates between firm and interruptible are enormous. Interruptible water users pay 10% of the cost that's paid by municipalities and businesses. Capital costs should be shared equitably. The way things are set up right now, that's not what's happening, and I have a graph which will show you specifics on that. We need to stop waste. 15 to 20% of the water is lost when it comes from the drought-stricken area, usually of Austin, to go down to Matagorda Bay. That's 15 for 20% going that 600 miles. And then, in addition to that, you have 20 to 30% that's lost in unlined canals and going out into the fields. And no one is currently paying for that waste. We have encouraged our river basin, the LCRA, to set prices to incentivize conservation. And they were given the right to do that through the 1989 adjudication and just have chosen not to use that piece of the law. At interruptible raw water prices under $25 an acre foot, that's when 2024, when it's gone all the way through the process, there's just no incentive to address loss of water. And developing a market would send a price signal to address water losses. If you'll look at the next page shows, these are LCRA graphs that came from their 2019 business and financial plan. And this is what I wanted to show you is the reason we were looking at the option of a bidding process for interruptible water. If you look at this one, this shows firm customer billing. And that's what it's called. It shows the light blue, shows you how much water the firm customers are getting. And then up above it, if you just look at 2018, it shows you that firm customers pay $145 an acre foot. And it's also labeled firm water rates. And this is for firm customers. If you look at the interruptible rates on the next page, and I apologize, when I started dealing with water in Central Texas, I didn't intend to become a water nerdy person, but you cannot deal with water without that happening. So you just have to learn to deal with the data. If you just look at Gulf Coast rate, okay? There are 4 rice districts. 2 of those rice districts pay for raw water. 2 of them do not pay for water because of contractual issues. But if you look at Gulf Coast for 2018, it says, the navy blue part says delivery cost. The light blue part says river management. That's not river management. That's actually the amount of water that interruptible pays for raw water. So they are paying $13 basically an acre foot, where firm customers are paying $145. If you look at other basins, BRA, they have a different kind of structure. They're like 74 and 52. And this is something, I know it's a policy for this river agency, and they're the ones that deal with this, but I think the bidding process might be something that would be helpful. If you go to the next page, I'm just going to skip through this because it's been a long day. Capital water projects. The biggest problem that we have with capital water projects is that firm customers are required to foot the bill for 100% of prospective dam rehab and capital projects. There's not equity in the amount of money that is paid for either raw water or is paid for O&M cost. Interruptible customers pay 20% firm customers pay 80%. And that just does not seem to be fair. If you notice on the water, the page 17, water capital data from LCRA, it lists specifically, LCRA will issue debt to pay for these projects and recover the cost in the firm water rate. So we've dealt with inequities. We've spent 8 years dealing with use of efficiency, getting away from flooding as a technique for irrigation when there are many, many options that are out there that can be done. And so basically on the last page, our development of this market would encourage conservation and also fairness. Water rates are unfairly skewed, with interest rates paying less than 10% of what firm customers use. And that just does not make sense in this day and age. Water rates should be changed to include funds to pay for capital projects, such as those interests also benefit, because everyone benefits from the projects, just as we all hopefully will benefit from the Arbuckle Reservoir. Firm customers should have an opportunity, and not just firm customers, environmental customers, anyone should have the opportunity to access water offered at interruptible rates through a bidding program. Now, what I'm giving you is a concept. I'm not giving you a pilot plan. I'm not giving you a list of these are things that this is the way this would be done. I'm just looking at the water marketing situation and looking at what would be helpful for our basin. The floor could be the interruptible rates. Rates could range upwards from there. Allowing such bidding would begin to send signals to the market, encouraging conservation through price signals. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or
Did you have any
whatever.
questions or comments? Tokar, you just talked about development of a water market. When
Yes.
you actually bid on it, when you have a disparity of $76 per acre foot in the Brazos and $145 in the LCRA, what is the price of water in Texas? When you have the industrial complex on the coastline relying on both those rivers, they're competing with municipalities for the water. If you opened it up and you said, we don't have a fixed price today on that water, it would probably elevate way above 145 for both basins. And then you would have people would choose whether to opt in or out. And I don't know how we materialize that market because right now, because of government intervention, we don't allow that market to truly identify what the cost of water is. So you've identified one of our biggest challenges of figuring out the people in the Brazos, they could probably get a lot more than $76. And the people in the LCR and the lower Colorado basin probably get a lot more than 145. We've got to figure out the balancing act between ag because they need to have a preferred pricing structure or they can't afford to grow the crops and we need those.
I agree completely. And I think the whole issue with this is going back to, you don't want to think about water as a commodity, but you have to, at this point, when you're going through the planning process, look at it from that perspective. But I also think you definitely have to allow a break for irrigators, for your agriculture. 97% of your agriculture in the state does a fantastic job with conservation. They do a fantastic job. But then you do have some areas, such as in our basin, where that simply is just not happening to that same extent.
You got people in Freeport that just need to buy water to expand their plants. And we just got a supply and demand issue. And I think if you change the price structure, a lot of supplies will become available because people want to sell it. So thanks for your idea. Members, does anybody have any other issues? This closes this interim charge. Yes.
I'd just like to recognize in college vernacular here, give a shout out to my nephew, Cameron Kalina, who here is a sophomore at Baylor. And I saw him come into the room, and Cameron, good to see you. Thanks for
Cameron,
joining us.
I wish you could have got into A&M. We appreciate you coming. Thanks for coming.
I didn't say that.
Yeah, but he was thinking it. And I'd also like to recognize somebody that sits in this room throughout the last several years and is probably as smart as anybody is on Texas Water, and that's John Schnauts with the Speaker's Office. This will be our last hearing, and we really appreciate your advice and your counsel on a lot of the water policies that have come into play over the last 6 or 8 years. So thank you, John. And with that, members, I will adjourn this meeting. We stand adjourned.
Good meeting.
Good job, buddy.
Did we wrap them up?